The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 201 Expo Date. Once Lex returned to his apartment, he investigated the ring given to him by John, but when he saw the size of the massive book that appeared in his mind, he quietly and respectfully put it away. That was not to say that he had given up on the book, but that currently he had his hands full with learning his techniques and didn't have the mental energy to read what looked like a physical representation of Wikipedia. He spent the day practicing, as usual, but at night he did not immediately fall asleep despite his exhaustion. His mind wandered to the situation with Helen. Alexander had spent all his time at the inn since he last talked to Lex, hoping for Helen's return, but to no avail. He had finally left today, and at a glance he did not seem too bothered, but with the power of the host attire, Lex could tell just how stressed he was. Lex even overheard a conversation he had with his family about her. Since Alexander was so busy with his own things, he had not realized how neglected Helen was, though no one could be blamed for this. His family were caught up in their own tasks, and though they shared a courtyard with her, they would usually only see her once every few days. Alexander felt guilty for neglecting her, but there was nothing for it. Lex, however, had his mind on another matter. He was considering whether there was a flaw with the keys, but he didn't have enough information. The only thing he could conclude was that if Helen didn't use the key, it meant that she didn't want to, she had lost it, or, as much as he didn't want to consider it, that she was dead. Lex sighed and pushed the thoughts away and allowed himself to fall asleep. The next few days Lex followed the same routine, and slowly built up his familiarity with using his spiritual techniques. He also used his Leo persona more often, for two main reasons. First, he wanted to build up more relationships as Leo, not to mention he couldn't leave Z to run the gamer's den all the time. Secondly, he used the Leo persona to learn as much as he could about the universe. One of Leo's most frequent guests at the gamer's den was called Crawford, 981. He was a very friendly guy, but had been suspended from duty for the next month over something he only called the incident. Leo didn't care much about the details of the incident, but spent a lot of time chatting and gaming with 981. The man was like a walking encyclopedia for the universe, and Leo learned a lot about the kind of worlds one can expect to encounter when traveling the universe. Despite the massive size of the empire, and the prospering cultivation not to mention technology, it seemed that the empire actually did not interact with about 90% of the inhabited planets in its territory, for various reasons. The quickest summary of it was, they simply didn't have the manpower for it, and often enough, it wasn't worth it. They would let the worlds continue to exist on their own, unless they encountered a demon invasion, birthed a sufficiently strong enough cultivator, or possessed rare resources. These planets that had been left ignored were almost always ground of sky-level civilizations. Ground level meant that they had not yet even left their home planet, and sky level meant they had colonized multiple planets in their star system. Over the period of a few days, Leo learnt a lot of common practices and trends among these kinds of worlds, as well as some of what one can expect. Of course, this was Lex building up his knowledge base for when he starts connecting new worlds again. He learnt common forms of currency, frequently repeated etiquettes across the universe, and many more details that might be useful to him should he end up at such a planet. One more thing Lex learnt from him, the most important thing, was the name of the star system that hosted the Jotun Empire's main planets in the galaxy that hosted the Vega system. It was known as the Pendal system, and hosted 11 planets that had all been inhabited, and hosted the various bodies of the Jotun Empire's governance system. Leo didn't care much for the details of that, but memorized the name in case it ever came up. As leisurely as the days were passing, Lex was now only waiting for the vine to enter the golden core stage. Once that was done, Lex would leave the security of the inn in Mary's hands and start traveling once again. This was not only to increase the inn's connectivity, as during this extended lull it was experiencing, Lex had only earned a total of 21,000 MP since the midnight games ended, but also for an event he knew would be coming. One day, Miranda reappeared at the inn. She looked just as exhausted as ever, with the number of dark circles under her eyes ever increasing. This was a rare sight amongst cultivators, but she made it evident that it was still possible. She did not waste any time, however, on any services, and directly asked to meet with the innkeeper. Lex, who was in the middle of practicing his techniques, had her wait a while as he finished up and showered. "Miranda, it's good to see you again. I hope you've been well," the innkeeper said, as he appeared in the private room she had rented while waiting for him. "Not as well as I would have liked," she replied with a mocking smile on her face, though it appeared she was mocking herself. For some reason, in front of the innkeeper, she did not maintain her usual facade. It was as if she expected that the innkeeper would be able to see through her attempts at keeping things together, and so did not even try. Obviously, the council's rule over the earth was not progressing as they had hoped. They had broken away from the chains of the family heads seeking freedom, only to be brought down by an even stronger, more mysterious force. Waking up from her daydreams, Miranda composed herself and focused on the business at hand. Innkeeper, I would like to talk to you again about the expo I brought up previously. Earth's political situation has stabilized, and we are ready to begin planning colonization of the rest of the solar system, but before we begin that we want to know what kind of support we can garner via business relations out in the universe. We've also obtained some rare and unusual resources from the new minor realm that has opened up, the uses of which we cannot yet identify. Perhaps they will have a high demand, or perhaps they can shed a light on their uses to us. Regardless, we have much to gain and offer from this, but at the same time, we are not yet ready to host it. We want to have the expo at the inn in 6 months' time, and by then we will be completely ready with a very thorough list of all that we can offer, as well as what we are looking for. This should also be sufficient time for any interested parties to get ready, as well as word for such an event to spread. Well, if you are sure, I will book the date for you. For an event like this, the deposit will be 1 million MP and the rest will depend on how exactly you want the expo to proceed and what kind of services you require. You can come to me 1 month prior to the event, and then we can discuss in greater detail the options available to you. They spent some more time hashing out the details before Miranda quickly left, as there was no shortage of work for her to do. Lex, on the other hand, returned to his room and looked at his calendar. 6 months of time before the expo was more time than he was expecting, but that was a good thing for him. This event was also one of the reasons Lex was in a hurry to extend his reach to more planets. If he only advertised this upcoming event to the same 3 planets, the image the inn had built up of reaching the whole universe would be greatly affected. It was currently October, so the event would happen in the middle of March. It was up to him now to expand the inn's reach as much as he could without overwhelming himself. He was not worried, though, as the equipment he had ordered had already arrived, and his practice was going along well. Whatever the next world could throw at him, Lex was ready for. 3 days later, the vine finally entered the golden core realm, and its speedy growth slowed down considerably. The only way to speed it up once again would either be to increase the level of the greenhouse, or provide it with very high-leveled resources as fertilizer, neither of which Lex could do at the moment. It seemed as if everything was telling him it was time to move forward. Chapter 202x, 142. Secretly, Lex spent a good amount of time testing the delinquent viper vine's ability. Naturally, he spread the vines around the entire inn, underground of course. What Lex was testing was how quickly the vines could come out of the ground and restrain someone. He tested it out in areas devoid of guests, of course, and on practice dummies. The speed naturally could not match that of his previous guards as well as bodyguards, but a portion of that fault lay with Lex himself. His mind could not work at the same speeds as them, and so his response would take longer. The remainder of the issue was, of course, that the vine itself had only just entered the golden core realm. Mary was no better at controlling it than Lex, but she was no worse either, which was nice. Still, the vine was fast enough and would have to do for now. Lex spent the remainder of the day going over the miscellaneous details of the inn with each and every worker, in case there was something he needed to fix, or a system he needed to refine. A prominent problem he was facing was that, while he had various vegetables to serve in the form of spirit food, there was a distinct lack of meat. At the moment, Lex had no solution for this, as there was no ranch option in the system. Other than that, however, fortunately the inn was running smoothly. In fact, there was a surprise for him at the greenhouse, in the form of a lotus. The turtle brought it to Lex's attention, and for good reason. If it remained in the inn much longer, the lotus was going to die. The turtle told Lex various things about the lotus, but claimed to only know as much as its instincts would tell it. To be sure, the turtle was correct. Lex scanned the lotus. Name, World Seed Lotus. Age, 0. Species, Primordial Origin Lotus Series. Condition, decaying. Report, the World Seed Lotus is deprived of primordial spirit energy in the inn. Expose it to the universe outside the inn, or raise the inn star level to 8 to let the lotus survive. Remarks, it's dying anyway, make lotus cake. The system scan didn't give Lex the information he wanted, but the name was very telling. Still, he found it difficult to comprehend. Are you sure this thing can create a world? Lex asked, eyeing the simple black-colored lotus. Look at it. How can you not tell that it will give birth to a new world? But it's suffocating, you need to take it out. How do I do that? The lotus is, naturally, sentient. Reach your hand out to it, and it will accompany you. Sentient? Lex eyes the lotus, but could not tell anything. Still, he reached his hand towards the lotus, only for it to promptly jump up from the ground and land in Lex's hand. Yet when it fell in Lex's hand, it fell into his skin like a tattoo, and crawled all the way to Lex's back, where it found a comfortable position to sit. Then, as if it were a real tattoo, it stopped moving. Thanks, Lex heard a squeaky voice say in his mind, startling him. He tried to talk back to the lotus, but it had stopped replying. The idea of a sentient lotus living on Lex's back may have freaked him out, if he couldn't feel a continuous stream of warm energy entering his body from his back. He had no idea what the lotus was doing, but instinctively he knew it was good for him. The lotus can give birth to a planet, the turtle repeated. That doesn't mean a massive rock will suddenly appear in space. It will be a new planet, with an established and awake world spirit. Since the lotus can create something so wonderful, naturally it will also provide some help to you for aiding in its growth. How long will it take for it to birth a planet? Lex asked curiously. A world spirit was a great thing. If he had enough time before the planet was born, he could. Not long, I think. Anywhere between 500,000 to 800,000 years. Lex immediately put the lotus and the world it would create behind him. I'll think about it again in 499,999 years, Lex thought to himself and chuckled. With everything in the inn taken care of, Lex returned to his apartment to gear up. This time around, he had refined his kit even more after his last trip visiting a world. It was sufficient to say that everything he wore, from his boots to his pants and shirt to even his undergarments, were actually armor in disguise. Unlike last time, when his clothes looked like tactical gear worn by an earthen soldier, his clothes this time looked like normal clothes. Other than that, he had a knife strapped to his leg, a sword along with the heavy Harley at his waist, a deployable talisman shield, tactical tracking drones, a generic Jotun communication wristwatch and a couple of other gadgets. These were just the things he wore on his body, and did not include the items in his armored backpack. Since he had to be selective with the items in his backpack, he had 10 spirit coins, 10 gold coins, an emergency first aid kit, some dry rations, various tiny grenades, stimulants, sedatives, and a cultivator's version of a Swiss Army knife, gifted to him by Will. A lot of thought had gone into his gear, and though he was still missing out on many things, he had to be selective. Each item served a specific purpose, and could mean the difference between life or death. That was not exaggerated at all. For example, spirit coins, which were a commonly seen currency in the universe, even used on Earth. Lex could have brought more, or even spirit stones if he wanted to, but too much wealth might attract the wrong kind of attention. Though only 10 coins would not last him a long time, it would be enough to get him started if he were in a situation that required commerce. The gold coins served the same purpose. A familiar feeling of excitement and nervousness filled Lex as he spent 100,000 MP on purchasing the wooden ticket. As embarrassing as the name was, Lex did not dwell on it as he crushed it, and a familiar screen opened in front of his eyes. Planets available. Planet, Alf. Planet rating, 1 star. Planet distance, 2 sectors. Planet environment, extremely diverse biomes, resource-rich. Planet, X-142. Planet rating, 1 star. Planet distance, 3 sectors. Planet environment, strictly regulated, conducive to normal life. Planet, I-44. Planet rating, 1 star. Planet distance, 1 sector. Planet environment, planet has been converted into an ore farm. Lex was pleasantly surprised to see a few options presented to him, which was more than he was expecting. He wished it was a tough choice after reading his options, but Alpha immediately seemed dangerous with its extremely diverse biomes. Nothing about that actually indicated that the biomes had to be dangerous, but it did not assure him either. Why, 44 was an ore farm, whatever that meant, but Lex could only associate that term with mining. Not only did that make it seem like the planet was hospitable, it probably did not have the kind of habitation Lex was targeting either. X-142 was also risky, as strictly regulated indicated the planet was under someone's control, but it could also be a good thing. Such a planet might have a civilized society with established security systems to protect societies and such. Of course, no matter which planet he picked, it would involve a great deal of risk. So Lex simply stopped hesitating, put on his bathroom slippers and monocle, and selected X-142. One drawback to it was that it was 3 sectors away, so it would take longer for the system to build a connection to the planet, but nothing was perfect. Lex was enveloped by a bright, warm light, and then disappeared. When Lex reappeared, both his hands were near his weapons, ready to draw at a moment's notice. Both times he had visited a planet, something had happened to him quickly after he arrived on the planet, so he wasn't expecting anything different. Yet what he did not expect was to be immediately assaulted by the smells of street food and the sounds of downtown New York. Lex was standing in the middle of a busy bazaar, with beings walking past him in both directions. No one seemed bothered by him suddenly appearing from a ball of light, and in fact, he received a few annoyed looks from the nearby stall vendors. His monocle was going crazy as it identified everything in his vision, but he didn't need its help right now. Other than the ordinary humans passing him, how could he not identify the flying fairies, the floating balls of slime and, most importantly, the catmen and women shopping around him? Had he teleported into an anime? That's when he heard the familiar ting of a new quest in his mind. Chapter 203 Infinity Emporium. Lex, after moving to a corner so that he wasn't literally standing in the middle of all that foot traffic, checked the system for the quest. New special quest, sell a rare item to Infinity Emporium. Quest reward, subject change based on value of items sold. Remarks, gotta get that cash money, baby. Lex was intrigued, to say the least, not only by the quest but by the remark the system gave. Had the system been watching late-night TV? Still, this was the first special quest he had received, and he was interested in learning about it. But first, he had to investigate the situation on this planet, and learn if there was anything he should avoid. He turned on his generic Jotun communication wristwatch to see if it worked. A hologram appeared before him as the watch tried to connect to any available networks and, after a few minutes, successfully connected to the local planetary network. As much as he wished he could Google things, the watch provided him with similar functions and Lex looked up anything he could about X-142. Soon, the watch opened up a historical and cultural website that detailed the occupation of this planet. About 3,000 years ago, this star system had come under the control of the Dmitri family, a legally recognized noble family in the Jotun Empire. They were a business-oriented family, and used this entire star system as the foundation of their agricultural business. Not only had they colonized all the planets in this system, the X-14 system, and regulated each planet to be suitable to grow certain kinds of crops, they provided safe and accommodating planets for the citizens of the empire to settle and work in. The rest of the page was filled with endless praise for the Dmitri family, which Lex directly dismissed as propaganda. He breathed a sigh of relief, as he had landed on a planet under the control of the empire. He knew from the conversation with Crawford, 981, that the galaxy that Vegas Minima was from wasn't fully under the empire's control, so it was really up to his luck whether he would land on such a planet. Fortunately, he had, and even had a plan of action he had devised in such a situation. The first and most important thing to remember was that while it was alright for Lex to create an account on the Henali portal, something akin to a universal internet, he must absolutely not get himself registered in any Jotun Empire facility. This was because the Jotun database was apparently shared, if not galaxy-wide, then at least over several star systems. Furthermore, every few decades, the databases would be compiled together. Lex doubted that amongst the probably hundreds of trillions of citizens in their database, they would notice him even if he did regularly get registered or scanned at various planets, but Lex did not want to leave a record. As for why it was relatively safer to log into the Henali portal, it was because no one he ever talked to had ever heard of any kind of disciplinary force, or in fact any force altogether, associated with Henali. Whatever it was clearly targeted towards much higher-leveled cultivators, and people with less power or authority than a certain level weren't even qualified to know about it. As a result, the Henali was very openly used to conduct shady business, and even the Empire couldn't do anything about it, as they could not even get the real identities of the users. Still, all of that was for later. Right now, Lex had to do a few things. He had to find cheap accommodation, find Infinity Emporium, and think of a way to earn enough money to help him survive however long he would be here. How convenient would it be if I had a branch of the inn here, Lex thought with a chuckle, then froze. That wasn't a bad idea. He quickly put down having branches of the inn on various planets as an idea to look into. Lex looked towards the nearest vendor, a man, beast? The nearest vendor was humanoid, but with thick, purple skin and a face that looked like that of a tiger, but with two protruding horns on his forehead, with long, flowing white hair. Lex had no idea what race he was, but walked up to the man and asked, "Hey, any idea where I can find the Infinity Emporium?" Unaware of the particular customs on this planet, Lex was concerned about somehow offending the man, but apparently he did not need to be. "Maybe you buy something, it'll jog my memory," the vendor said with a smile. It was completely not the vendor's fault that his toothy smile exposed some vicious-looking teeth and looked more intimidating than friendly. Lex looked at the vendor's wares, and his monocle scanned the items. He wanted to find the cheapest-looking thing but, he had no idea what anything on the stall was. There were blades, that much was certain. But these blades were unusually shaped, with odd curves and blunt ends that clearly indicated they had a very specific purpose. "My friend, I need to sell something to the shop, as I don't currently have any money at all." Cheap," the vendor muttered under his breath, but then explained the directions to Lex anyway. It seemed that despite his grumpiness, the vendor was a good man, beast person thing. As Lex started following the directions, and only then realizing he was still wearing his bathroom slippers, Lex thought about what to do once he reached the emporium. The easiest thing would be to sell an item from the inn, but he didn't want to do that. He could sell one of the items or pieces of gear he brought with him, but that would depend on what kind of shop the emporium was. When he reached, he saw a modest-sized building, but one with a spectacular finish. That was not to say the other buildings weren't well designed, but something about the emporium was just eye-catching. Lex considered inquiring about its architect for a moment. One other thing that stood out about the emporium was the large number of people going in and out. The shop was clearly a popular one. Since there was no particular line, Lex simply stepped in the shop, following one of its customers, but was taken aback once he stepped in. The shop, though simple, was absolutely gorgeous. A red carpet ran from the front door to the counter, spread over a milky white marble floor. The walls were carved with various designs, with a few pillars half protruding from the walls. The ceiling was painted as well, not to mention lined with elaborate woodwork. But despite its spectacular splendor, what surprised Lex was that he was the only other customer in the shop. All the people Lex had seen entering had disappeared, and only a single man stood behind the counter, grinning at Lex. It seemed as if he was able to tell what had surprised Lex, and was thoroughly enjoying the reaction. "Welcome to the Infinity Emporium. Please, do not be alarmed. This is just a bit of clever use of formations to give each customer their privacy while shopping. We value our clients' privacy highly." "Not bad," Lex commented as he stepped into the shop. He took a look around, and though the shop looked amazing, he could not actually see any wares. Should shops display what they're selling? "What kind of business do you do here?" Lex asked curiously. "We can provide anything you wish for. Anything legal, that is. Of course, we have a membership program, and if your membership level is high enough, even some things that aren't legal can become an option." Are you sure you should be saying something like that so openly?" "Why, of course," the shopkeeper replied while laughing. "The Dmitri family, and everyone else relevant, know about our business. They are not very concerned, and even they themselves sometimes shop with us." Lex raised an eyebrow as he wondered about the man's words. "And do you buy things from customers?" Lex asked. "So long as an item has any kind of monetary value, we can take it off your hands." Lex wondered about the man's answer and considered his actions. The rarer the item he sold, the better his reward from the system would be. Since there was no time limit, it wasn't as if he had to sell something right away. He decided to wait a while before selling something, hoping he could find something on the planet. And, if he wasn't able to find anything, he'd just sell a golden key. "Since you sell everything? I'm pretty broke right now, and need information on a cheap but safe place to stay, and a possible way I can earn some money." "Excellent. Since you are on a budget, I'll compile the cheapest folder I can. That'll be 1 spirit coin, sir." Lex handed over the coin, which, by the way, wasn't exactly a cheap price for some basic information. But since Lex didn't want to waste time figuring out things on his own, this would have to do. After accepting the coin, the shopkeeper handed over a simple folder, summoning it out of thin air, and grinned at Lex, as if he had just spent millions in the store instead of a single coin. Chapter 204 New Races. Lex opened the folder that had only a few pages inside. On the first page was a list of cheap places he could stay, listed in terms of geographical distance from Lex's current location, which was the Emporium. The rest of the pages had lists of jobs he could do that didn't require a long vetting process, as well as the basic requirements of each job. It need not be said that each job was targeted towards Chi training realm cultivators. It was not a surprise that the shopkeeper was able to determine his cultivation realm, as there was no way for Lex to hide it unless he used some kind of treasure. But what did surprise Lex was how quickly the man was able to provide such a detailed and well-organized list. Lex had only asked, and the man immediately provided it. "Hey, I come from a human-only planet. Would you happen to have a list of all the different races on this planet and a little bit of information about them?" "Such a list is not a problem at all," the shopkeeper said, summoning another file. "Since this information is all common knowledge, it is much cheaper than your first request, only 2 gold coins. I can also provide a more detailed list, should you need it, but that will raise the price." "No, this will do for now," Lex said as he paid the man and put both folders in his bag and turned to leave, but the shopkeeper stopped him. "Excuse me, sir, before you leave, there are a couple of things which are my responsibility to tell you if you have a few minutes to spare." Lex was in general very impressed by the shop, and so decided to hear him out. "Firstly, sir, the Emporium places a great deal of emphasis on maintaining the client's privacy, and so I would like to assure you that details of a client's purchase history will never be leaked under any circumstances. This is an Infinity Emporium guarantee." Secondly, upon a total expenditure at the value of 10 common grade spirit stones, you become eligible for a basic membership card. The membership has various levels, and at each level, more and more items become available to you to purchase. And thirdly, the Emporium currently has an ongoing sale on skin, wing and horn care products that will end in 7 hours. Got it, thanks, Lex said, and chuckled as he left. The only skincare he ever indulged in was moving away from body wash, shampoo and shaving foam all in one bottle and getting 3 separate products instead. That was quite enough for him. As soon as Lex left the Emporium, the shopkeeper couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as he muttered, "A fancy monocle, eh? Haven't seen one of those in a while. How retro." The first thing Lex did once leaving the fancy shop was head in the direction of the nearest tavern where he could stay, sightseeing along the way. This city he was in was an unusual mix of extremely advanced and extremely basic technology. A good example of that was the hundreds of vehicles flying about in the skies, while an alien equivalent of a donkey cart pulled someone along the street. Or the simple wooden stalls, but with virtual or holographic vendors. He also saw many different races of beings walking around, though humans still maintained the majority. When Lex finally arrived at the tavern, he read the name Bent Benches spelled out in a neon sign, hung across a balcony in the wooden building. It was a curious name, but Lex didn't put much thought into it. When he walked in, though, the building was completely empty. Lex would have expected such a cheap place to be packed with guests, yet not a soul could be seen, not even a worker. On his left was a long, wooden bar, and on his right a long, rectangular room full of empty tables. There was a corridor leading deeper into the building right in front of him, but Lex felt strange about randomly strolling into the building. Maybe there was something he didn't know about how taverns worked in this world. Yet just as he was pondering, he picked up the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. He leaned over the bar and saw a man rocking back and forth in the fetal position, taking deep breaths with his eyes closed. Are you all right?" Lex asked awkwardly. The man was surprised when he heard Lex's voice, and turned to look at him. When he noticed a guest, he flashed him a bright smile and said, "Could you wait just a few minutes? I'm right in the middle of dealing with an anxiety attack." Sure, I guess," Lex replied, as the man flashed him another smile before once again closing his eyes and returning to what he was doing. Lex took a step back to give the man his privacy, as he awkwardly waited for the man. About 15 minutes later, the man stood up as he dusted himself off and approached Lex, with a smile. "Sorry about that, was just dealing with some stuff. You know how it is." The bartender looked fairly young, with ruffled hair and a wrinkled uniform, but at the same time, looked quite presentable. Yeah, sure, totally, no problem. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need more time?" No, I'm good. I've gotten pretty good at dealing with those. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to rent a room for a week." "Not a problem at all, that'll be 4 gold coins." Lex handed the man the coins, but the barkeep didn't immediately accept it. He eyed the coins curiously, and then scanned them with a device. "Well, it's real gold, but I don't recognize where it's from." "Let me guess, you're fresh on the planet? You came at a good time, my friend. It's almost time to harvest the gugu fruit, but you need to be at least in the initial foundation realm to be a harvester. Tough luck, my friend, that's the kind of stuff those scammers leave out when they just want you to fill in the seats in their transport ships. Each year we get a lot of people who come looking for jobs, only to find out later that their level is too low." Lex flashed the man a weak smile, but said nothing. The bartender jumped over the counter and led Lex down the corridor towards his room. "There's no room service, so try to keep the place as clean as you can or you'll end up living in a mess. The kitchen's currently out of order as well, so if you want to eat you'll have to go out. I can give you a list of nice places nearby where I usually eat from, if you're interested." The man continued to list everything that was wrong with the place, making Lex wonder if it was even worth the few gold pieces he paid, but when he saw the room that thought went away. Unlike the old and disheveled state of the building, the room was immaculate. There was a massive window with a balcony, a neat king-sized bed, a study table with what Lex assumed was a computer, and a private bathroom. Everything was clean and tidy, and looked relatively new as well. "Here's the key, and have a good stay," the bartender said before leaving. The man had a smile on his face the entire time he was with Lex, and had a cheery attitude, so it was hard for Lex to imagine what caused him so many anxiety attacks. Lex put the thought behind him and entered the room, scanning everything with his monocle. After ensuring there weren't any cameras or mics or such in the room, Lex finally relaxed, and took out the folders he received from the Emporium. He scanned both the documents again with his monocle, then began reading the list of potential jobs. Considering the cheap price of accommodation, Lex was no longer in a rush to find a job, but it wasn't a bad idea to be in the know. As could be expected, none of the jobs looked too alluring to Lex, but there were a couple of alternative options listed that Lex wouldn't mind trying. As one can guess, one of those options was betting. Apparently there was some kind of tournament being held nearby by one of the agricultural academies ahead of harvest season. Lex made a mental note of it, not because he was interested in gambling but because he wanted to learn more about the culture of this world. Once he was done with that, it was time for the other list, the one with all the races on this planet. Of course, this did not literally list all species and races, as that would include various wild animals and cattle, but only the species recognized by the Empire as legal citizens. The one that Lex immediately noticed was dragons. Chapter 205 The Return of the Crazy Cultivation Novel. Lex could scarcely believe what he was seeing. Dragons. Actual, living dragons. For a few moments, Lex's imagination went wild as he thought of every fantasy movie he had ever seen, and envisioned the massive, powerful behemoths they depicted. When he finally woke from his fantasies, Lex quickly read the description. Dragons. Massive, reptilian beings with immense power. No actual dragons have been reported in the X-14 star system, but various species of drakes, dragons with impure lineage, were original inhabitants of the system, leading to the belief that dragons may have once lived here. Drakes still reside on multiple planets in the X-14 star system, and are renowned jewelers. Alongside the description was an image of a lizard-like being the size of a rhino. It was covered in brown scales and had large claws. Lex had no idea how a being with claws made jewelry, but he didn't want to sound racist so he just accepted the description. While going over the list, he discovered that the beings Lex assumed were catmen and women were just a subspecies of humans called Nico, and were just one of the many human subspecies that existed. The list was surprisingly long, and also included Adelomorpher, the race that Remy belonged to. Adelomorpher. New species formed from a mutation of the human subspecies, Adelas. They are able to shapeshift to assume the appearance of any humanoid species, and are born with the ability to traverse space. Adelomorphers are known to be highly aggressive in nature, and own many businesses in the X-14 star system. That was a curious description and caused Lex to wonder why they were listed as a separate race from humans, while so many others were listed as subspecies. Lex noticed a common trend of new species being born from pre-existing ones from the list. He would probably need an in-depth study or report to learn the difference between a subspecies and new species, and how they were identified. For now, he just manually went over the list so that he had some notion of the various races, and made sure that the fancy monocle recorded them all. After that, Lex tried to use the computer so that he could comfortably look up more information, but when he could not figure it out after 20 minutes decided to simply learn the old-fashioned way, walking around and investigating himself. With no specific idea of where to go, he asked the bartender for directions to the tournament, and then started to stroll in its direction. He took his time and often stopped to listen in on the conversations people were having around him. He didn't want to seem shady, but it was the best way to learn whatever was most relevant at the moment. Most conversations seemed to be focused on the upcoming harvest season. Apparently, the gugu fruit was one of the major cash crops of this planet, with an incredibly high demand for it. Not only was it an incredible spirit fruit, it had many applications in medicine, pill-making, alchemy, and many more fields which Lex had no idea about. Most importantly, it was a favorite snack of a type of mount that was very popular among high-level cultivators. As he listened in on conversations, he could not help but imagine what life must be like for a family that used entire planets as farms. Of course, devils were the same, but the Dimitri family consisted of humans, so Lex could relate to them somewhat. It also let him know that his inn wasn't unique or interesting enough for these kinds of guests. Maybe they would come due to the prestige he had built as the innkeeper, but the inn itself was lacking. Eventually, Lex climbed aboard what looked like a tram because reaching his destination was taking too long. Originally, he thought he might get lost, but it seemed a majority of people were heading to the same place. The venue was a massive, square building with endless crowds streaming in. It really bewildered Lex from the popularity this harvesting tournament had, but since most people's livelihoods on the planet were connected to it in some way, it made sense. The entry ticket was a steep 8 spirit coins. Lex almost immediately decided to skip it, but just as he was turning around, he noticed something. He stood perfectly still as he blatantly listened to a conversation some people were having. No, Lex thought to himself. This can't be. It's impossible. To make sure, Lex walked around outside the venue for a good 30 minutes, and slowly his expression turned from disbelief, to shock, to excitement, then back to disbelief. It was impossible. Things like this didn't happen in real life. It just couldn't be. But it was. Lex hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a risk. Anyway, he had already paid for his stay for a week, so if he fell short on money, he would have time to make it back. As Lex paid for the cheapest possible entry ticket, his mind wandered back to when he last read a very popular cultivation novel, Ultimate King Emperor, All the Gods Call Me Daddy. It was the novel Lex read where the MC's adopted sister was a saintess who was kidnapped by celestial beings and who then killed the MC by destroying his entire planet, but the MC actually reincarnated. Lex had already read the next 1,000 chapters after that, which firmly concluded the first arc, and allowed the MC to finally leave the planet he reincarnated on with a harem of 9 women who were all strong, independent women who were originally stronger than the MC, but somehow lost their will, goals, and personalities once they fell in love and spent their days planting flowers in a garden, waiting for him endlessly, because that's how harems work. Of course, most of those women felt bitter and slight resentment towards the MC, not because he had too many women, but because of his noble and pure heart, which caused him to reject many women. They were upset because he rejected them. Anyway, Lex usually skipped those parts, so that wasn't what he was focused on. During one of the mini-arcs, the MC enters a tournament. Lex remembered that he had to read 17 chapters straight that just consisted of all the viewers simply insulting the MC for no particular reason. Honestly, Lex would have skipped those 17 chapters, but the insults were just so creative that he couldn't stop himself from reading. In the 18th chapter, it was finally revealed that everyone was just sucking up to some big shot who, by happenstance, had only slightly indicated that they had a minor conflict with the MC. Naturally, that minor conflict resulted in a fight that destroyed not only the antagonist's entire family, but several other organizations. He recalled vaguely the original fight being that the MC wore the same color clothes as the antagonist, or something mundane like that. Lex was getting sidetracked in his thoughts again. The main point was, while the MC participated in that tournament, he was the underdog and the tournament, for reasons unknown, started gambling with 10,000 times the return if the MC won. Such a stake in itself was stupid, but the point was the MC finally won and earned a lot of money by betting on himself. The reason Lex was bewildered currently was, word for word, Lex could hear the surrounding people insulting someone called Tetsuya Saigen with the same insults. Furthermore, Lex learned that Tetsuya had only entered the Foundation realm, the minimum requirement to participate, mere minutes before the deadline to enter the tournament. As if that wasn't enough, the rumor was that Tetsuya had a rivalry against the son of the owner of the academy he studied at, who stole Tetsuya's girlfriend. To top it all off, the gambling stakes for Tetsuya were a 10 times return, something Lex actually thought was crazy high. As a sane person, cognizant of the fact that this was reality and not a cultivation novel, Lex did not believe for a second that the cliché scenario from cultivation novels was going to play out in front of him. But that could not stop him from betting his last spirit coin on Tetsuya, and finding his way to his seat in a daze. The surrounding people made fun of him too for betting on Tetsuya. How they knew who he bet on was another mystery. But it was too surreal. Everything was happening like in the novel. What Lex didn't realize was that since everything was following such an established cliché trend, in a private room a second-generation brat who was staring at Tetsuya's picture with eyes filled with hate and ridicule was just informed that someone had just placed a bet on Tetsuya. He frowned. How dare someone not follow his exact wishes and actually take advantage of the great odds he himself had personally put up against the brat? Remember him, the spoiled brat said. I'll personally take care of him after the tournament. Chapter 206 Consequence of Arrogance. When Lex arrived at his seat, there were already some preliminary matches going on. But Lex had no idea what was happening on stage, so he could not help but ask the people sitting next to him. Sitting beside him was a Roslo, the same species as the purple-skinned, doubled-horned vendor Lex met the first time. According to the description Lex had of their species, they were extremely easy to aggravate, but also very easy to befriend. They were known for their extreme physical prowess, along with the ability to display that prowess with skill and precision. Still, Lex had no trouble having a friendly chat with the Roslo, and asked about how the tournament worked and what he was supposed to be looking for. This particular Roslo was apparently a very skilled harvester and loved talking about it, so it ended up helping Lex. The explanation started with the origin of the tournament. Harvesting gugu fruit, as some may have noticed, was a major trend on the planet. But the harvesting process was not as simple as picking an apple from a tree. The first and most basic requirement was to be in the Foundation realm. This was because, when the fruit was removed from its tree, regardless of whether it was a successful harvest or a failed one, a great deal of spirit energy would be released. Some people may think that being exposed to a great deal of spirit energy was a good thing, but such was not actually the case. Chi training cultivators could not handle a great deal of spirit energy in their body, which is why they cultivated only a few strands of chi. In fact, at each level in the chi training realm, a cultivator would only absorb 11 strands of chi, so that by the 9th level the cultivator would have 99 strands of chi. Absorbing that 100th strand was a part of breaking into the foundation realm. Therefore, if a large surge of non-neutral spirit energy entered their body, they would immediately suffer from spirit energy poisoning, the effects of which ranged from being bedridden to straight-up death. The next requirement of harvesting gugu fruit was technique, precision, and skill. The fruit that looked like a red mango, but with a harsh exterior like that of pineapple, had to be removed in a certain way to preserve its potency from dropping, and allowing it to be transported for use at a later date. This was a very brief description of the process, like saying a person used fire to heat ingredients as a description for cooking. It wasn't inaccurate, but there was a lot more to it. Such techniques were obviously not practiced on the actual fruit itself, as they had a long maturing period and were extremely valuable, so certain fruits were artificially designed to have the same extraction requirements as the gugu fruit, but had no other value. Naturally, when an environment that had high stakes as well as many highly skilled people was created, it nurtured competition. That is how these tournaments originated. Having a greater understanding of events, Lex paid great attention to the stage. He wanted to get a good understanding of what to expect when Tetsuya finally came on stage. Lex wasn't anticipating his arrival because he was comparing it to the MC from that ridiculous novel that he could not stop binge reading. As free-spirited as he would not waste 80% of his money on a hunch. He had actually received a quest from the system when he first heard people discussing him. New quest, the inn caters to all the universe, but not all guests are the same. The inn is not only a place where guests stay, it is a place to where they may seek refuge on their tumultuous journey in the cultivation world. Help Tetsuya Saigen avoid calamity by having him retreat to the inn. Quest time limit, 10 hours. Quest reward, support token. Remarks, the system is literally finding good guests for you. Go do something on your own once in a while. Since the inn gave such a high review of Tetsuya, Lex didn't mind betting his money on him. Besides, it wasn't like he was taking any personal risk by doing so. At worst, he would just lose some money, not a big deal. Thinking that, Lex stretched his body as he got comfortable in his seat. He could feel the crowd's anticipation slowly building, and soon the preliminary matches ended and the main event finally started. Lex noticed quite the hype as the contestants came up on stage one by one. One person, in particular, attracted a lot of attention. That's Brent, the Roslo sitting beside told Lex. He's the son of the head of the academy hosting this tournament. Last year, he was in the top 10 for most gugu fruits harvested during the harvest period. There are rumors that this year he's been recruited by the Dmitri family to harvest in their premium fields. Wow, that must pay well, Lex said casually as he stared at Brent. So this was the guy Tetsuya had a rivalry with? Just as Lex was playing out an elaborate backstory in his mind for how their rivalry would play out, another contestant stepped out on stage. It wasn't as far as the crowd starting to boo him, but the negative opinion of the crowd was evident. On the stage a tall, thin man had stepped out with bright red hair and a proud smirk. Lex did not need to be told that this was Tetsuya, but his next actions immediately confused Lex. He went up and greeted Brent, and the two seemed to be having a pleasant conversation. Isn't that Tetsuya? I thought he had a rivalry with Brent. No, not with Brent, the Roslo said with excitement. It seemed like he thoroughly enjoyed gossiping. Brent is the Bast *RD son of the owner, and grew up on the streets with Tetsuya. The two of them are like brothers, and it's even said that the whole reason why Brent raised his cultivation so high was because Tetsuya gave him some kind of treasure he found. But the academy owner's rightful son and heir, Darius, who was raised in the lap of luxury, apparently hates Brent, and hates Tetsuya, too. There are even rumors that there have been assassination attempts on Tetsuya. At this point the Roslo was whispering. If people know that he's the victim, why does everyone seem to hate him so much? Lex asked in confusion. In the novel, everyone hated the MC because the villain hated him, but that did not seem to be the case here. The kid is very skilled in combat, and his harvesting technique is not bad, the Roslo said with the air of an expert, but he's too arrogant. He's had a tough life, sure, but who hasn't? He uses overcoming difficulty as an excuse to look down on everyone else. He's always picking fights and insulting everyone, so why would anyone like him? Even when he's in the right, he's too proud to explain, as if everyone should be omniscient and just know not to blame him. Instead of considering that there could be a misunderstanding, he directly picks a fight. And of course, since he's so talented, he wins the fights more often than he loses, which makes people hate him even more. People don't hate him because of anything someone else did, he can manage to attract all that hate on his own. Lex frowned, as he continued to watch the stage. The matches had already begun, and massive trees were raised from holes on the stage, each with various sized fruits hanging from them. The contestants were already harvesting them, with many large screens focused on each of the contestants. Tetsuya's description was quite different from what he expected, but there were all kinds of people, so he couldn't really comment on how Tetsuya should be. Not to mention, this seemed to just be an outsider's opinion on the matter. Maybe things were actually quite different. Regardless, Lex wasn't really interested in making friends, anyway. He just had to slip Tetsuya a key, and let him use it to avoid whatever catastrophe he was about to face. Once that was done, his quest would be complete and Lex could continue exploring this planet and learning about their culture, so he could plan on how to host them better. As much as the crowd was riled up, Lex quickly got bored. That was not to say the tournament was easy, as Lex learnt. Harvesting each fruit was a long and arduous process. But in the end, Lex was just not interested in watching fruit be harvested. Nearly 5 hours later, the tournament finally ended, with Brent coming in first and Tetsuya coming in second. There were moments in the tournament where it seemed Tetsuya was either extremely unlucky or that he was being targeted, as 3 of the fruits he tried to harvest exploded just as he was about to complete the harvest, revealing pests hidden inside the fruit. Despite such a setback, he had somehow managed to come in second, and win some prizes, as well as the right to participate during the actual harvest. Lex quickly went to gather his winnings, 10 spirit coins, and then began to think about how he was going to meet Tetsuya. As he was not experienced in these matters, and since he was not expecting it, Lex was completely unaware that he was being followed from the moment he collected his winnings. Some people in the crowd noticed when the number of followers slowly increased, but they said nothing. It was best to stay uninvolved in other people's trouble, not to mention they could soon be getting a free show. Chapter 207 Volcanic Rage. Once the tournament was over and he collected all his winnings, Tetsuya did not forget to go collect his winnings from the bet. Although he did not get first, which, even without his bad luck, he probably would not have gotten, the bets were on his being in the top 3. Unlike Brent, who had multiple sources of income to support him, Tetsuya did not, so every spirit coin mattered. Naturally, since he was stepping into the public, he was wearing a face mask to hide his identity. He wasn't oblivious to the fact that he wasn't well liked, but couldn't find it in himself to care. The only reason he even wore a mask was because his time was valuable and better spent elsewhere than arguing with an idiotic mob. When he went up to the counter to collect his winnings, he did not bother with any small talk and just handed the man his slip. The man, on the other hand, could not prevent himself from chatting a little. "Must be to catch a break like this, huh? You know, you're the second person to collect winnings from betting on that Tetsuya kid. Though, your winnings are a lot more than his, I can tell you that." Someone else bet on Tetsuya, he couldn't help but ask, surprised. "Isn't he afraid of Darius?" "Aren't you?" the man asked, finally handing over Tetsuya's winnings. He looked like a foreigner, and didn't bet much. It doesn't look like he knew what he was doing, maybe he just saw the stakes and couldn't help himself. Stuff like this happens. Tetsuya nodded to the man, and left with his winnings. He could not help but find himself musing. On the off chance that this wasn't a foreigner being ignorant, he better go check things out. It was not like he wanted to go and help Darius out, but in the event that this was a trap and something happened to him, Tetsuya would shoulder the blame. As for the possibility that Darius wouldn't pursue this matter, it was impossible. That brat was too small-minded and egotistical to leave things like this alone. On the bright side, because of that, tracking Darius would be extremely easy. He just hoped he made it in time. Lex was casually looking for a restaurant to eat nearby. He wanted to treat himself a little before he went looking for Tetsuya. At first he was concerned that he wouldn't have a way to reach him, but it turned out that he was extremely notorious and many people knew the location of his apartment, as the place always attracted a lot of trouble. In a situation like this, finding him wouldn't be the issue. It was convincing him to use the key when he was in trouble that was difficult. During this time, he was woefully ignorant of the few people following him from a distance. They were waiting for the moment Darius would catch up with them. If not for that, they would have taken care of the target already. They followed him to a restaurant, and then decided to clear the street outside while they waited. Soon, the crowds dispersed, and the unusually quiet street stood out drastically in such a busy city. They didn't care though, as that had nothing to do with them. When Darius finally arrived, it was obvious that he was in a bad mood. Not only had that insufferable Tetsuya come in second, more importantly, Brent had come first. The more they displayed their talents, the worse off Darius would look. After all, while they were busy harvesting the fruit, Darius had not even broken into the Foundation realm yet. He was at the peak of chi training, but because he had relied heavily on medication to reach this realm, he couldn't break through so easily. It would require sufficient preparation. "Where is he?" Darius roared as soon as he entered the street. "He's in the restaurant, boss," one of his faithful goons answered. "Should we go drag him out?" "No, I have a better idea," he said with an ugly, evil grin. A short while later, Lex exited the restaurant feeling extremely satisfied. He had no idea what he had eaten, and as far as he could tell the dish consisted mostly of some kind of vegetables he'd never seen. But not only was it spirit food, the flavor was beyond anything he had ever tried. Lex had already decided to gather as many seeds from this planet as he could. While he was lost in his thoughts, something distracted him the moment he stepped out of the shop. Why was the street empty? But, before he could think more on the matter, something smacked him straight on the forehead. Lex's body was hurled off to the side and smashed into a nearby pole. The attack was so sudden and so heavy, even after he had fallen to the ground, he did not completely understand what was happening. His head was spinning and his ears were ringing. He tried to gather his thoughts, but it seemed he was concussed. He saw dirt and blood. He tried moving his arms, but suddenly felt like he couldn't find them. After a couple of moments, he started to recover, and could hear the sound of laughter. He picked up his head to look around, as he brought his hand to his head, and felt the blood dripping down his face. "Boss, I think he's still alive," one of the goons said, noticing Lex move. "Well, I'll be damned, he survived a hit of my full strength. I guess he needs a little bit more of my love," Darius said with a malevolent grin as he walked towards Lex, holding something similar to a baseball bat in his hand. The end of the bat was covered in sharp spikes, one of which was covered in blood. The next moment, Lex finally recovered, his thoughts started to flow once again. At first he was confused. He was being attacked? Why? Then came the anger. In his entire life, Lex had never been assaulted by another human. The training with Marlowe hardly counted, as that was training. Neither the zombies nor the wolves that once nearly killed him either affected him in the same way as he was being affected now. In Lex's mind, they were beings of a different species, and so it made sense that they would fight. But while he had been in difficult situations with humans, he had never been successfully attacked like this. Not to mention, since he was homeschooled, Lex had no experience with bullies either. So now that he was attacked by humans, for seemingly no reason, he was filled with a rage the likes of which he had never known. The chi in his body flowed like burning lava and he used auxiliary burst flawlessly, one of the two offensive spirit techniques he knew, and fired the heavy Harley directly at his attacker's face. Auxiliary burst increased the damage of any attack it supplemented, which, combined with the close range and power of the gun, all smashed into his attack like a cannon. Lex was attacking to kill, and currently he had no thoughts of morality or right and wrong in his mind, he only wanted them to die. His rage affected him in a way Lex had never experienced before, and he had already entered the state of flow he was so familiar with, but this time it was stronger than ever before. Lex's accuracy was on target to the millimeter, and even as the man with the bat fell backwards, each bullet continued to hit him directly in the center of his forehead, though they couldn't seem to pierce his skin. The goons who had been laughing and enjoying themselves so far were shocked by the sudden change, and by the time any of them reacted, Lex had already fired 10 shots. Shouts of anger and panic filled the street as some sprinted towards Lex while others towards Darius. But even outnumbered, they held no advantage over the enraged Lex, who had by now gotten on his feet. After 10 shots, he was fairly certain that the man with the bat was wearing some kind of treasure that Lex could not break, so he turned his target to the others. Drawing his short sword and holding it in his left hand and the gun in his right, Lex released a vicious battle cry as he met his foes in battle. Lex did not even realize that he was using Falcon Relief, Chi Repulsor and Chi Blade and Auxiliary Burst all at once, as his focus was on his foes. Balancing on the heel of his foot, he twisted as he dodged an attack and swung his blade towards the nearest goon, and shot his gun at one farther away without looking. It was not a fight but a slaughter, as even once none of the goons were able to exchange a single attack with Lex. In the distance, Tetsuya munched on a snack as he watched the fight. The kid was young, but he wasn't bad. Yet despite his amazing display, his inexperience was evident in Tetsuya's eyes. Still, for now, he only watched. Chapter 208 Exhausted. Chapter 208 Exhausted. After a couple of minutes, 4 bodies lay on the ground near Lex, either groaning in pain or passed out. While there was blood on the floor, it wasn't nearly as much when considering the kinds of wounds inflicted by Lex. These goons must have had some kind of protective or healing treasures on them, yet that mattered little right now to Lex. While 4 goons were down, 4 more stood by Darius, who had gotten up from the ground, holding a hand over his forehead where Lex had shot him. His face was entirely red, though you could not tell if it was from pain or anger. "I'll kill you," he roared as he gave Lex his ugliest and most despicable glare. Yet Lex did not give him the reaction he wanted. Lex did not cower in fear or beg for forgiveness, but just gave him a sneer. Though blinded by rage himself, Lex was cognizant of the fact that this person had not come here to simply rough him up. Let alone that he was smacked directly on his head by a metal bat using the full physical strength of what Lex assumed was a peak chi training realm cultivator, but the end of the bat was covered in sharp pikes. He could distinctly see blood only on one of the spikes, and was aware of the fact that he had just gotten extremely lucky that the spike hadn't been able to puncture his skull. Otherwise, Lex would be dead. When that thought went through his mind, Lex was enraged even more. He holstered his gun and reached his hand into his bag. Since Lex was able to sense spirit energy now, he was better able to gauge the realms of those near him. Just based on the sheer magnitude of the pressure that two of them gave off, Lex knew they were Foundation realm experts. But so what? Since he had started traveling across planets again, he had taken precautions for even if he faced Golden Core experts, let alone two Foundation realm ones. Of course, neither Darius nor the others intended to give him the time to retrieve whatever he wanted from the bad and attacked him. While Lex was still able to keep up with the speed of the other goons and dodge them, there was nothing he could do to keep up with the Foundation realm ones, so he immediately deployed the talisman shield. The shield was 1.5 foot wide and 4 feet long, and hovered around Lex freely. Once activated, it would block attacks on its own, and would last as long as the energy in the talisman didn't fade or until Lex dismissed it. Activating and dismissing it were easy, but they both required Lex to consciously choose to do so. Fortunately, this talisman shield Lex bought from Chen was actually a Jotun product, and was quite strong. This was because the two Foundation experts' attacks landed as soon as he deployed the shield, hurling Lex back. But even as Lex fell back, he was not distracted, and pulled out a few tiny cylindrical items from the bag and flung one of them at the goons. The strongest two goons immediately realized the threat and retreated, but the rest were not so fast and were struck by a spiritual blast. The two Chi training realm goons were directly knocked out as their bodies flung into the air. Darius was protected by some kind of treasure once again, but even that could not stop him from falling backwards. Just as Lex was about to rush forward to continue attacking them, he ran out of chi. All the techniques he was using immediately stopped, and exhaustion hit Lex like a sledgehammer. This was the first time he had been completely drained of chi since he entered the realm, and he nearly blacked out from the shock of running out of chi and his techniques being forcefully stopped. But while he managed to keep himself awake, his state of rage-fueled flow was broken. But while Lex was suddenly out of breath, and it took a great deal of effort to use his brain, and he was almost entirely physically drained, he could still continue to fight. As if making a decision, his face hardened as he reached into his backpack one more time to search for something. But before the goons could attack him again, and before Lex could continue to fight, another person appeared in Lex's sight. He wasted no time and smashed a brick against the goons' heads, knocking them out, before kicking Darius in the face to reach the same result. Lex recognized this new person immediately. It was Tetsuya. Up close, he looked even more ordinary than he had on the screen, and Lex couldn't help noticing that his cheeks had a slight dip, as if he was starved and malnourished. "Not a bad performance," Tetsuya said casually, and he reached down and started patting Darius and his goons. Lex was momentarily confused before realizing he was robbing them. "You were a little heavy-handed on the chi usage, which was a mistake. Always try to leave at least 30% of your chi reserves to run away. If you dip that low and the fight hasn't ended, it's time for you to run away." "I could still fight them," Lex said hoarsely. "Yeah, I noticed," he said, as he eyed Lex's backpack warily. "But I suspect anything you did now would kill these guys. Don't misunderstand me, I have no love for these guys. But, as much as I want to, I can't let this guy die," Tetsuya said as he stripped Darius of all his valuables. "Why?" Lex asked, ignoring the increasingly frustrating headache he was developing. The ringing in his ears had only gotten worse after he ran out of chi, and while he was slowly catching his breath again, it was very irritating. "You see, this little brat has a great enmity against me. It's no secret that he's moved against me both openly and under the table. The problem with such a situation is that, should anything happen to this runt, I will be the first person blamed. That will make it impossible for me to ever leave this planet. So, as long as I am on this planet, I have to take care of this idiot." "Why don't you just leave?" Lex asked, confused. But Tetsuya didn't reply, and only smiled at Lex. "I take it you're a foreigner here, since you were stupid enough to bet on me. In that case, I'll help you a little. While this kid and his family can be considered local big shots, it's only in this city. If you stay here, they'll come back for revenge unless you find a backer. But if you leave the city discreetly, then they'll be hard-pressed to find you. Also, while I don't really care about the rest, my suggestion is that you don't kill them. That way, the local police will be forced to start an investigation." Lex looked at the various goons laying on the floor. Now that his anger had disappeared, his inclination to kill them had also gone as well. In fact, he was feeling a little conflicted about how easy it was for him to decide to kill them. Tetsuya saw the hesitation in Lex's eyes, but did not comment on it. "Since I only came at the end, I won't take much. This is your share of the loot," he said, as he neatly put an assortment of seemingly random items in a bag and handed them to Lex. He did, however, easily recognize the few dozen spirit stones and a pouch full of spirit coins that also went in the bag. With that, Tetsuya grabbed Darius by the leg, and began pulling him away with a casual smile. It was as if he didn't take the situation seriously at all. "Wait, take this," Lex called out, as he threw a golden key at the man. "Take it as a thank you gift for helping me out. Crush it, if you're ever in trouble you can't handle." Tetsuya caught the golden key, and observed it carefully. He had noticed Lex using various weapons, so he assumed this was just one more and put it in his pocket. Lex had used some powerful weapons that weren't so easy to get on X-142, so he took his words seriously. "If I were you, I would get on the first ride out of this city. There's a train station nearby, so if you have nothing holding you back, that's the destination I would suggest for you." With that, Tetsuya left. He had already spoken more to Lex than he did to most people, and his social battery was running dry. Lex, who stood there for a couple more moments, let out an exhausted sigh as he turned and started jogging away with 2 bags on his back. He regretted paying rent at his hotel already, but this wasn't so bad either. Why should he spend his time on this planet cooped up in a tavern? No, Lex would take on the role of a tourist and explore. Once he had left, some people finally stuck their heads out of the shops nearby, and quickly started sharing the videos they took of the fight. It wasn't every day you got entertainment like this on X-142. Chapter 209. Get that cash money, baby. After jogging for a couple of minutes and finally entering a busy street, Lex entered a random shop and asked to use the restroom, dropping a spirit coin in the shopkeeper's hands. The obvious bribe, along with his blood-covered face and clothes, prompted the shopkeeper to quickly guide him to the restroom. Cleaning the clothes was fairly easy, as the blood washed right off whatever synthetic material they were made from. He cleaned his sword as well and quickly checked to see if any of his other pieces of equipment had blood on them. Once that was done, Lex pulled out a first aid kit from his bag and looked at himself in the mirror. He'd never done anything like this before, and though Lex was not squeamish, he still needed to mentally prepare himself before he began. Something like the needle failing to pierce his skin due to his increased defense did not happen because Lex had ensured to get equipment suitable for his body. While it did not pierce his skin easily, it got the job done. Having zero prior experience and only a YouTube tutorial seen long ago as a guide, Lex's stitches were not neat, but he managed to close the wound on his left temple. He put a band-aid over it to hide his shoddy work and downed a bottle of Botlam Dew. It was convenient having a quick fix potion, and Lex planned on enjoying it while he could, as once he entered the Foundation realm it would no longer be effective on him. As it was, due to his body, soul and spirit being combined, his healing capability was already slowed down. Yet Lex did not mind that at all, as had he been even slightly weaker. That thought kept shaking him every time he thought about it, and his guilt at wanting to kill those guys had long disappeared. Maybe if he actually ended up killing someone, Lex might have reacted differently, but as it was, Lex actually found it difficult to make himself feel anything other than anger. A lifetime of watching TV and reading novels told Lex that maybe he should have been feeling some kind of negative reaction to the thought, but he honestly wasn't, and he couldn't be bothered to care more about it. Once he was done, Lex quickly put his clothes back on and left, asking the shopkeeper if there was something akin to a taxi. There was, and soon Lex found himself sitting in a flying pod that was dashing through the air towards his destination. The air pod, as it was called, was just big enough to fit a sofa on which Lex sat, and accommodate a holographic screen in front of him. The experience was amazing, but unfortunately, Lex had only just begun to explore intergalactic TV when the pod stopped, and opened up to reveal the Infinity Emporium. Since Lex was planning on leaving, there was no way he would leave the quest unfinished. Lex had spent some time thinking of what exactly to sell to the Emporium. Naturally, all the items supplied by the inn were considered by him, including even the lotus he carried on his back, but a random idea struck him. Since the Emporium sold everything, they also likely bought everything, including information. As far as information was concerned, there were a lot of things that could be sold, including the information about the devil Loretta's father being an insanely powerful cultivator. But Lex did not want to get involved in selling any of his guests' personal information, as that might lead to problems down the road. He did, however, recall something that he once longed for. He wrote down the exact information he got from the system regarding this specific matter, and wanted to see if the Emporium would buy it. He entered the shop, once again marveling at how effortlessly the shop separated him from the other guests, and walked towards the familiar shopkeeper. "Hey man, I have a few things I wanted to buy, as well as a few things I wanted to sell. I was hoping you could help me out." "I would be most happy to help with that," the shopkeeper said with an air of familiarity. "I never caught your name last time. I'm Lex, by the way." "How rude of me. My name is Powell Grant." It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Lex. Likewise, Powell, likewise. Now, Powell, I'm facing a bit of a conundrum and I was hoping you could help me out. Most of the things I intend to sell should be pretty easy for you to appraise, he said, as he slung the bag Tetsuya had given him off his shoulder. But I do have something that I'm concerned you might not be able to identify the proper worth of. Oh? Please, do elaborate, and I'll help you however I can. I assure you, so long as the business is authentic, we never turn it away. See, that's just the thing. I have a piece of information I'm looking to sell, some very valuable information at that. Now, I know the information I'm selling is accurate, but how do I convince you that it is true? Because if I hand it over, and you don't believe it, that'll be quite a loss for me. I see your point, Powell said, nodding his head. Normally information comes from reputable sources, but what does someone who does not yet have a reputation do? Of course, we have a few ways of authenticating information. Please, follow me. Powell opened up a latch on the side and lifted the counter, providing Lex a way to follow him to the back of the store. Lex followed the shopkeeper into a room, but paused the moment he stepped in. This room was like something out of a movie. Everything in the room was white, from the walls to the furniture and even the paintings that were made from different shades of white. In the center of the room were two sofas facing each other, with a table between them. On the table was a white orb. Please, have a seat, Powell said, his voice coming out in a whisper. That's when Lex noticed that the man's clothes had also changed color and become white. He looked down, and even his own clothes, while still being exactly the same, had changed their colors to white. Strange room, Lex said, and was shocked to find that even his voice became a whisper without him meaning to do so. Intrigued, he sat opposite Powell, who had summoned a white paper cuff. There are two ways we use to authenticate information, both of which are employed in this room. You can wear this cuff, and put your hand over the orb and provide me with the information you wish to sell. The cuff will detect if you are lying, and will change color if you are. But that is not normally enough, as informants can sometimes be misinformed. The second judge is the orb, as it detects your karma regarding the information you provide. If anyone has tampered with you, or the information, the orb will detect it. If you pass both of these tests, we consider the information you provide to be true and accurate. Lex put on the cuff, but before he placed his hand on the orb, asked, "And what will you do if the information is extremely valuable? Are you sure you can pay me appropriately? It's an Infinity Emporium guarantee. So long as the business is authentic, we can handle it." Lex raised an eyebrow and decided to test it. It wasn't like he was losing anything by trying this out, as he was just giving away some information that was useless to him. On the off chance that the Emporium wasn't able to buy the information he was selling, he wondered what would happen to the quest. After all, the information directly referenced Tao Lords. Some time ago, I managed to secretly obtain information about a unique item called the Bangle of Narn. The bangle is actually a single galaxy condensed into a bangle form, that can be worn without any harmful consequences. Everything that exists within that galaxy can be used and controlled by the wearer. The aura of the bangle cannot be suppressed and can be easily identified by all Downlord realm cultivators within 99 million light-years. Lex eyed the cuff as well as the orb, but neither of them had any reaction. When he looked at Powell though, his reaction was very satisfying. His jaw hung open in shock as he stared at the orb for any signs of a lie or interference, but there were none. But, as shocked as he was, he quickly recovered, and gave Lex a smile with the warmth and passion of a lover. "Lex, no, Mr. Lex, do you happen to know anything about the bangle's location? Or the owner?" "Unfortunately not," Lex replied with a chuckle. He himself almost became the owner of it once, but as tempting as it was to own an entire galaxy's wealth, he did not regret giving it up. He tried not to dwell on the fact that even the Jotun Empire was not able to flawlessly wield the wealth of an entire galaxy, despite owning many. "How unfortunate," Powell replied with actual regret on his face. But he composed himself quickly and returned to the matter at hand. "Mr. Lex, the information you have provided is truly valuable, despite not having any information on its location. First, I would like to thank you for trusting the Emporium with this boon. Second, I would like to ask, how would you like to get paid?" Chapter 210 When the Arrogant Fall. "I would like to ask, how would you like to get paid?" Powell asked, smiling as if he was the one getting paid instead. "Well, why don't you tell me what options I have and then I'll consider it." "Yes, of course. I'll start by explaining how the Emporium membership works. The most basic customers we cater to are non-members, but depending on how much money they spend, they can get membership for our establishment. But, the membership is not so simple, as it has levels. To grow from one level to the next, the first requirement is to spend a certain amount of money. However, clients of a certain stature automatically membership based on their cultivation. Body tempering is equivalent to level 1, though they don't get automatic membership, chi training is level 2, foundation is level 3, and so forth. To make it easier to understand, each level member has access to a greater number of our items. The information you sold to us touches upon the boundary of level 9 membership, but doesn't quite cross it, and so it is categorized at level 8. Suffice to say, for selling such information to us, you automatically get level 8 membership and have access to all our treasures or information up to that level. You can accept payment in the form of spirit stones, treasures, information, or store credit as you desire. I must let you know that this is only a small store, so we don't have all the items you might see on the list, but as long as it is within a branch on this planet we can have them teleported over from our other branches immediately, so it should not be a concern. That's great, show me the list. But at the same time, there are a few things I need, so how about I ask you about them, and you can guide me? Certainly, said Powell, as he handed Lex a tablet with a long list displayed on it. Well, first of all, if I'm going to trade for a lot of items, it'll be a hassle to carry all of them around, as I will be traveling for a short while. We do have a few items with spatial properties that are categorized as level 7, but unfortunately, none of them are on this planet. An alternative I can offer you is a locker. You can place any items you get in the locker where the Emporium will take responsibility for their safety. The locker also comes with a key, which you can use to teleport the contents of the locker inside to yourself. The key will be linked to you, so that in case you lose it, someone else cannot use it to retrieve your items. I guess that'll do, Lex said, disappointed he couldn't get the spatial items. He really wanted to be able to summon and put away his belongings the way he did within related items from his inventory. Unfortunately, as uncooperative as the system was, Lex could only place items he got from the system in his inventory, not other things. Alright, the first thing I need, and I think this is the perfect planet for that, is some fertilizer for a plant I have at the Golden Core realm. I want to help it grow as fast as I can. Indeed, we have an excellent selection for that, Powell said, and pulled up some items on the tablet to show Lex. Lex did not hesitate to buy double the recommended amount of fertilizer for the delinquent vine back at the inn. It was unfortunate that this planet only grew plants up to a certain level, as the options of fertilizers would have been even better options. Lex also bought various seeds and saplings for fruit trees and vegetables. He would need to grow the area for the greenhouse once he got back, but he didn't mind. This was a good problem to have. Next, he bought an excellent binding technique for pets. It wasn't that he doubted Fenrir would not be loyal, but a binding technique would not only make it easier for Lex to communicate and help grow Fenrir, it would aid in the growth of both Fenrir and Lex. As long as one of them was stronger than the other, the technique would have a nurturing effect on the weaker one, as a result of the technique. Of course, regardless of who was stronger, Lex would remain the controller of the technique. He also bought some ointments that would help him increase the speed of his cultivation. It had become abundantly obvious to him that because he was cultivating the Trinity, his body, soul and spirit, his speed was devastatingly slow. It was literally impossible to cultivate without external help. He bought himself a self-activating defense treasure, in case he suffered a surprise attack like last time. He also did not forget to buy more detailed information about the X-14 system as well as the Dimitri family. That took care of the things he already had in mind. After that, he began perusing the list for what they had. The list was expansive, to say the least. He ended up buying a lot of things, as well as information, that he thought would serve him well in the future, including a seemingly indestructible locket. There was nothing else special about it, as far as anyone could tell, but Lex had a workaround for that, and anything indestructible had to be precious. Unfortunately, Lex was severely limited in what he could buy as there was almost nothing above level 4 on this planet, in keeping with the buying power of this planet. With quite a bit of credit left, and no idea of what else to buy, Lex spent it all on spirit stones, seeds, ores and a few pieces of technology. He had no interest in maintaining any credit at the Emporium, as he had no idea when he would encounter it again. Then, stuffing everything he bought into one of the Emporium's lockers, Lex finally left. He'd ended up spending over an hour here, much longer than he was expecting, and now he just wanted to leave as quickly as possible to avoid any possible trouble. Putting on a mask he bought before leaving the shop, Lex stepped out confidently and hailed an AirPod to the train station. He was expecting that the trains here would actually be vastly different from what he was used to on Earth, but that wasn't actually the case. The trains looked remarkably similar to bullet trains back on Earth, but Lex wasn't in the mood to speculate on the reason at the moment. Since he had obtained information on this entire star system, he naturally also knew a lot about this planet. He already had a destination in mind, and after buying a ticket for a private room, boarded the train. To Lex's great relief, no problems occurred while he waited, and eventually, the train departed safely. Tetsuya did not avoid the public crowd as he dragged Darius' body back to his house, and left him lying in front of the gate once he arrived. If something still happened to him after Tetsuya brought him back home, then no one could blame him. He wasn't really afraid of any retaliation, as the only ones on this planet he feared was the Dmitri family. This was because on this planet, anyone who surpassed the Foundation realm and entered the Golden Core was asked to leave the planet. The only Golden Core experts on this planet were direct Dmitri family members of employees. The reasoning for this was complex and served many purposes, but the result was that Tetsuya felt extremely safe. He had even fought off Foundation enemies while he was still in the Chi training realm, let alone now that he was in the Foundation himself. It was this well-earned arrogance that resulted in what happened next. Darius had hired sufficiently skilled people long before today to take care of Tetsuya. It was just that they happened to act shortly after LX thoroughly humiliated Darius in a public way as they were making preparations. The moment Tetsuya entered his home, it exploded. This was not a small explosion that could be covered up by local forces. This would directly attract the attention of the Dmitri family. But the assassination was far from over. Wounded, Tetsuya was trying to understand what happened from behind the protective cover of a defensive treasure, when something rammed through the cover of the treasure and directly blew his right arm off. It was only after he suffered the injury that the sound of a sniper shot rang through the street. Tetsuya, despite still being in shock, tried to move away, but the trap this time was too well devised. Before he could move, however, another shot blasted a hole directly through his chest. Tetsuya could not even fall as he was already on the ground, his eyes wide open in shock, his brain slowly shutting down, when a piece of debris fell on top of him, supposedly crushing him. But before he was crushed, it happened to break the golden key, teleporting the critically wounded man away. But no one saw him disappear. All the cameras which had been recording the whole incident caught a massive piece of debris crushing his body, before it too was covered in the fire that the explosion had started. Far away, the sniper sent the video to Darius before packing up and starting to run away. He had to get off this planet, or he would be the next one to suffer. Chapter 211 Peacock Warriors. A little girl was walking by herself as she explored the inn. Even though she was currently walking in the plain garden behind the Midnight Manor, this was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. But she was not lost in wonder as she explored this new terrain. No, she was scouting this new and probably dangerous place, no matter what Grandma Noah said. As a 7-year-old, she was already a big girl now, so she had to do her part in keeping her family safe. Speaking of family, hers was the equivalent of royalty back on Vegas Minima. Grandma Noah told her that her parents were the strongest natives of the planet, and before the arrival of the Jotun forces, they used their own power to protect the largest remaining human sanctuary on the planet. Although it was a city, it housed nearly 10 million people, all of whom were under her parents' protection for almost 200 years. The little girl, Layla, had grown up hardly ever meeting her parents, since they were always fighting zombies, and spent most of her time under Grandma Noah's care. That care, on a planet such as Vegas Minima, took the form of extreme discipline and training. Not a day in her life had gone by, as far as she could remember, that Grandma Noah didn't strap down and bound a zombie, and then made her kill it. She had grown up under the constant threat of annihilation, so the sudden change on the planet caught her unaware and she could not cope. Many people told her that she was safe now, and didn't need to worry, but she could not adapt. So she continued her training and maintained her vigilance. This morning, Grandma Noah told her that her father had been appointed governor of Vegas Minima on behalf of the Jotun Empire, and once things were finally settled, she would be able to live with them soon. Then her grandma brought her here, in wait for her parents, who were apparently somewhere far away. But while her grandma said this place was safe, Layla would not risk anyone's life, and so took it upon herself to scout the area. She saw a lot of strangely dressed people and strange animals. Though they looked to be non-hostile, she kept her distance, and a dagger neatly tucked into her sleeve. That is when she encountered her first threat, and it was extremely menacing. It had an oval head, with a beak sharp enough to pierce through a man. Its eyes were hidden in a streak of black feathers, with white streaks surrounding the black like war paint. It had a long, blue neck to give it extreme reach, and the feathers behind its neck had opened up into a massive fan. Dozens of eyes were imprinted on the feathers, all staring at Layla, as if ready to hunt. Just as she was about to grip her dagger, one of the ladies wearing the uniform approached her. This bird is called a peacock. It's extremely gentle and loving, you do not need to be afraid. I am not afraid. Layla quickly said, though her eyes were still focused on this obvious predator. My name is Valma. What's your name? The lady asked with a smile. Layla, however, did not reply, and eyed Velma suspiciously. Was this lady getting close to her to reach her parents? It was not the first time that had happened, and she would not let her succeed. Noticing the little girl's wariness, Velma decided to change the topic. Are you here with someone? Did you get lost? I can help you find them if you're looking for them. No, Grandma Noah knows where I am. She's very strong, so she always knows where I am. Layla said, her voice carrying an underlying threat. Velma, however, only chuckled when she heard her. In that case, do you want me to show you around? If you want, I can ask Little Blue to let you ride on its back. Before Layla could ask who Little Blue was, Velma pointed towards a baby whale that was flying close to the ground. Behind it, Fenrir chased as quickly as it could. Though Fenrir had a higher cultivation than Little Blue, since the latter was flying, it was much quicker. At first, the two animals looked extremely scary to Layla, but then she noticed the many flowers sticking out of Fenrir's fur. Little Blue had showered Fenrir in flowers from near the greenhouse, and many of them had gotten stuck. Since then, they had started a game of tag that never ended, mostly because Little Blue would fly out of reach whenever Fenrir got too close. After watching them for a bit, she admitted that the two animals looked cute. But the thing was, she did not understand what cute was. Instead of thinking about it, it was more of a feeling she had never felt before. She was too confused to respond to Velma. I'll just go back to Grandma, she said, deciding this place was too strange. Sure, Velma said, and accompanied her back to the manor. Inside the manor, a middle-aged woman sat leaning back in a chair in the restaurant, smoking a cigar. In front of her sat Hera, who was elaborating on the details of a trade agreement that Will had proposed between the two planets, or more specifically, the two parties from these two planets. Normally Hera would not have brought her son Jimmy with her in such an environment, but fortunately the air in the inn was very clean, and none of the smoke from the cigar ever made it to her child, who was standing meekly behind her chair. Just as they were in the middle of their discussion, a little girl ran into the middle-aged woman's arms and whispered, Grandma Noah, this place is very dangerous. I saw a lot of monsters. If it's dangerous, then form a hunting party. We do not shy away from it, Noah said, smiling at her granddaughter. Look, even that little kid is here, and he's even younger than you. Layla turned to look at Jimmy, who was peeking at her from behind his mother, and competition flashed in her eyes. Humph, I'm not afraid. I'm just submitting my scouting report, she said stubbornly, before pulling out of her grandmother's arms and eyed the little boy. Come, you're in my hunting party now, she boldly declared, before pulling Jimmy away to hunt some peacocks. Hera was hesitant, but eventually she said nothing. It was good that Jimmy finally had a chance to make some friends. On that day, in that backyard, the gallant Peacock Warriors gathered its first two members. Chapter 212 Support Token. Lex sat comfortably in his private room, with his legs stretched out on an ottoman in front of him. A plate of small, wrapped sweets had been waiting for him when he entered the room, some of which he had picked through and they were phenomenal. More and more, Lex was beginning to like this planet for its food, but that may simply be a result of excellent ingredients. After all, this was an agricultural planet, so their ingredients must be extremely fresh. Lex munched on another sweet as he read through the description of his reward for completing the quest to sell something to the Emporium. His quest ranking had ended up being an A, which influenced his reward naturally. But that's where the peculiarity of the special quest came in, as the system asked him if he had a reward in mind. Lex went through his quests that remained incomplete, and was reminded of one to find someone to help him run a new service. With that in mind, he asked to find the perfect employee that fit this role. The system could not reward an employee directly, but the reward was still influenced by the request. It directly scanned all the planets connected to the inn, and provided him with a list of beings most suitable for the job. The list was very lengthy, with over 100 candidates, and Lex intended to go through the list thoroughly before he made a decision. It was while he was doing this that he got another quest complete notification. Quest complete, help Tetsuya avoid calamity by having him retreat to the inn. Quest reward, support token. Remarks, completed the quest on a technicality, now you're thinking like an entrepreneur. Lex was confused by the remark, as he could not tell if the system was insulting him or complimenting him. Hey Mary, have we received a new guest? His name should be Tetsuya, he might be hurt. Yeah, we did, she replied hesitantly. But he's not just wounded, he's on the verge of death. His cultivation has been scrapped, and he has a massive hole in his chest and a missing arm. Since he had a lot of treasures on his body, and his cultivation level fell below yours, I used those as payments and sent him directly to the ORR, Organic Reconstruction Room. However, since you never set a price for the ORR, it was charged at cost, which is 1000 MP per hour. Lex bolted upright when he heard the news. Tetsuya was pretty strong, as Lex had witnessed himself, as he managed to incapacitate Foundation Realm experts with ease. Lex could not imagine how he ended up in such a wounded state. Despite all he had been through, this was the first time someone had used his ORR, which could reconstruct missing or crippled body parts. The only limitation to the ORR was that it was limited by his own cultivation, and could only work on those at his level or below it. Alright, keep me updated on his condition. With that taken care of, Lex leaned back in his chair and wondered if Tetsuya had been implicated because of him. It seemed unlikely, as he had received a quest long before he even decided to enter the arena. As for being concerned whether he would get dragged into this mess, Lex wasn't worried at all. One of the items Lex had purchased from the Emporium was called the Insincere Medallion. Its effect was not perfect, but it was good enough to hide his tracks in a situation where he wasn't being directly followed. The medallion basically hid everything about him as long as he was wearing it. If he left a fingerprint on an item, it would not be his. If he dropped hair, it would not match his DNA. If he was photographed by a surveillance camera, the image that would show up would not be his. Dogs would not be able to track his scent and his footprints would be wrong. Basically, any tracks he left behind would be wrong in some way. Of course, if someone had their eyes on him and followed him directly, the medallion could do nothing about that. But he felt safe, for now at least. He looked at his latest quest reward, the support token, and smiled. It was very useful. Support token. Select an employee. Once selected, you can summon that employee from the inn to your location, regardless of where you are in the universe. You can also unsummon the employee. This token was actually perfect. It was not like he was getting attached or anything, but he had been concerned about leaving Fenrir alone for long periods. Although he left the pup in the care of the turtle, and he had little Blue to accompany him, Fenrir was still extremely attached to Lex. As he was a member of the inn in an official capacity as protector, this token worked perfectly on him. Lex used the token to bind it to Fenrir, and directly summoned him into the private room. That was a mistake, as Lex had momentarily forgotten how big the wolf was, not to mention it had been slowly growing bigger as time went by. The private room was immediately filled by the giant dog that looked confused for a moment, then immediately recognized Lex, and sat down as it tried to rub its massive head against Lex's body. Lex had spent time in front of Fenrir without the host attire on when they were staying in the apartment, which is why the pup suffered from no confusion in recognizing him. Lex scratched the massive pup, unaware of the warm smile that had appeared on his face. Finally, after spending some time consoling the pet, he started preparing to use the binding technique on Fenrir. Technically, Lex himself was too weak to use the technique, so what he got was a primed talisman that would automatically implement the technique when he activated it. Not wasting any time, Lex activated the talisman, and felt a warmth starting to fill him, and a bright light covered both him and Fenrir. Chapter 213 Never-Ending Job. When Darius woke up in his room, surrounded by medical equipment and nurses, the first and only thing he felt was rage. Absolute freaking rage. He wanted to scream and yell, but he had to contain himself. Although he was spoiled, he was not an idiot. The one thing he could not do was embarrass his father, so he needed to find out exactly what had happened. He signaled someone to retrieve his personal computer and sent everyone out of the room. In his mailbox, the first thing he saw was the video of Tetsuya's execution. Immense gratification filled his heart as he watched this old nemesis die. It was a shame he couldn't send this assassin after his stepbrother as well, but he was already employed by the Dmitri family, so he was off limits. He watched the video a few times, then deleted it. This matter was definitely going to be investigated, and he could leave no evidence connecting himself to it. Everyone would suspect him, but as long as there was no evidence, no one would convict him. That's when he saw the various videos of himself being dragged through the streets by Tetsuya, as well as videos of himself being beaten by that kid he had attacked on the street. He wanted to explode in anger once again, but he contained himself. He took out a phone and dialed a certain number, which was picked up immediately. "Are you satisfied with the results?" the person on the other end asked. "Very, but I have another job for you. Unfortunately, we can no longer work together. Our associate who did the previous job has already left the planet, and we have no more resources to spare." "I did you a favor," Darius said, through gritted teeth. "And in return, we did you one as well. We are now even. If, in the future, the possibility of working together arises again, we will contact you. Until then, farewell." The other person shut the phone, further ruining Darius' mood. But at the same time, he understood that they had completed their original deal. There was no reason for them to go above and beyond. He grit his teeth and decided to take matters into his own hands. He dialed a second number, this time, to a private detective. He needed to know where that brat was staying. What to do about him would come later. In an office, a uniformed man was filling out some paperwork. His expression was grim, though this wasn't because of any recent incident. He was just always in a grim mood. His door opened and someone entered, and just as the uniformed man was about to scold the person for interrupting him, he noticed who it was and his grim expression changed to that of surprise. Compared to the uniformed man, the person entering was much younger in appearance. But the matter only went as far as appearance, because unlike everyone else in his family, this person's first name was Dmitri. He was the founder of their family, and though it had been many years since he took part in family matters, his position of authority would never change. "Ancestor, forgive me for not greeting you. I did not know of your arrival," the uniformed man said as he quickly got up. "Be at ease, child, I don't care for formalities. I just awoke from my cultivation for an important matter. I am truly saddened to hear about your father's passing, and would normally spend time with you to mourn, but I have urgent matters that need to be taken care of. I am told that you are in charge of security now." This was a common occurrence in cultivation families. Higher-leveled cultivators would often outlive many of their younger generations who did not have the same level of cultivation talent, and so could not extend their lifespan. To an outsider, this may seem tragic, but the cultivation families were already used to it. "It is an honor for my father to be remembered by you, ancestor, that is enough. Indeed, after retiring from the Jotun army, I took charge of our family's forces." "Good. I have received a personal missive from the Jotun Empire. Increase security on all planets by 100 times and decrease sales by 40% and use whatever is not sold to increase our reserves." "Did something happen?" the uniformed man asked, his signature grim look on his face. "I'm not sure. I reached out to a few acquaintances, and everyone was being told to slowly start mobilizing. The few who haven't been informed yet will probably get the call soon." This was highly unusual. Although the Dmitri family had leased this X-14 system from the Jotun Empire for 10,000 years, after the original lease was signed, they had not been contacted again even once by the Empire, and were left to their own devices. Such a missive out of the blue was not a good sign. "Do not worry too much. While this is unusual, the situation is not grave yet. I've even reached out to all battle fronts, and there is no unusual activity. All we need to worry about is ensuring everything stays normal at our end." "Has anything unusual happened on any of the planets recently?" "There was a terrorist attack in X-142, but I was going to let local authorities investigate it." "No, go investigate yourself. The timing might just be a coincidence, but since we're mobilizing, we'll leave nothing to chance." "Understood," the man answered, his voice as grave as possible. When his ancestor departed, the man left his office with the determination to face a fight to the death. His subordinates did not react to his expression, however, as for them this was not but an ordinary Monday. A day passed calmly, and Lex finally departed the train at his destination. He had arrived at the Firgen Forest, one of the original and untampered sites of the planet. The trees in this forest were massive, with even the smallest being 200 meters in height and over 50 meters in circumference. This was the largest natural forest on the planet, and at least the first few miles of it were considered a tourist attraction. Beyond that there was a gray zone where people were encouraged not to enter, and after that began the territories of the wildlife. While the Dmitri family could obviously eradicate all hostile beasts or animals on the planet, they did not, as they wanted to maintain the natural ecology of the planet as much as they could manage. Lex had no interest in going to those dangerous areas though, he was here purely as a tourist. "What do you think, Fenrir? A beautiful sight, isn't it?" he said, as he walked towards one of the concession stands. Fenrir, of course, could not respond, even in his thoughts through their shared link. But, because they were now bound, Lex could at least better understand the pup's feelings. What surprised Lex was that the dog had a lot of memories of pain, despite being born only a few minutes before Lex summoned him. Fortunately, those were only vague memories, and Fenrir was quickly overriding them with new, happy ones. From the stand, Lex grabbed a map, some snacks for himself as well as some for Fenrir, and then quickly climbed onto the pup's back. "Let's go," Lex said, and the pup started jogging towards the giant trees. The duo made an unusual sight, but still no one gave him a second look. The trees gave off a pleasant aroma, and the first was rich with all kinds of interesting plants and insects. With the help of the fancy monocle, they harvested some of the edible wild fruits, and the two feasted on their harvests. Towards the night, they followed the map to a designated camping area in the forest that overlooked a waterfall coming out of one of the giant trees. Massive fireflies flew around the forest, giving off purple light that illuminated the campsite like a scene out of a cartoon movie. A massive bonfire in the middle of the campsite attracted the most crowds, where a group was sitting on the ground playing musical instruments that looked similar to a flute. Lex traded some of his fruits for some barbecue and rented one of the better-looking tents since he hadn't brought one of his own. Fenrir made friends with a massive green-colored slime and jumped on it like a trampoline. After a few jumps, he discovered the slime suddenly changed and instead of bouncing off, Fenrir fell right into the slime. Some of the kids who were watching from nearby laughed, and the pup looked aggrieved when the slime let it out. Lex chuckled, as he took the time and chatted with the locals. It may have seemed like he was just making friends and enjoying himself, but in actuality, he was doing research. What kind of activities did the citizens of X-142 like? Currently, the answers seemed to overwhelmingly be spending time in nature. He had at least until the rest of the week to find out what that exactly meant, and if there was anything else on the list. Being an innkeeper was a never-ending job. Chapter 214 Execution. 2 days after Lex originally checked in, a small group of people entered the Bent Benches Tavern. As could be expected, the place was completely devoid of any customers. "Is anyone here?" one of the men yelled in an annoyed tone. "Just give me a moment, I'm dealing with something," replied a voice from behind the counter. The group leaned over to see a thin young man, rolled up in the fetal position. "We're looking for this man, have you seen him?" the first man asked, holding out a picture of Lex. "Just a few minutes, please, I'll be right with you," the man replied, as he started rocking, his breathing becoming heavier and louder. "What do you mean, a few minutes? Stand up and answer me, brat, you don't know who you're dealing with," the man said as he jumped over the counter and reached to grab the man on the floor. But things did not proceed how they usually did. The tavern keeper reached out his hand and grabbed, not only the man's neck, but his entire body as his hand had enlarged into a massive claw. "I said, give me a few minutes," he repeated himself, but his voice was no longer that of a human. It was unfortunate that the man never heard his voice, as his body had been squished within the tavern keeper's claw. The rest of the group yelled as they retreated in horror at the gory sight they had just witnessed, yet their noise only aggravated the tavern keeper further. His pupils thinned into vertical slits and his face started growing into a massive maw. Green scales started to cover his skin, but before the transformation could continue, a single streak of flame breathed out of his nose burnt the group to a crisp. With the interference gone, the tavern keeper closed his eyes and started taking deep breaths, slowly transforming back into the shape of a human. "Take deep breaths," the man kept murmuring to himself, as he continued to calm himself down in peace. Lex woke up feeling rested and great, as he let out a big yawn while stretching. It was not that he let himself fall asleep and let down his guard, but that with Fenrir nearby it was a lot harder for anyone to sneak up on Lex. Fenrir was not strong in his cultivation, but his senses were unmatched. Not only could he sense living things or fruits or basically anything edible nearby, he could even accurately sense the emotions of those nearby. Using that ability, Lex had spent the last day getting to know the others at the campsite. In fact, "Hey Joel, you guys ready?" Lex asked as he walked out of his tent, scratching his head. "Just about," answered a catman, or more accurately a male Nico. "I'm just cooking up breakfast while the rest pack up. We can leave once everyone has eaten." "Sounds like a plan to me," replied Lex as he watched the group. The group was composed of 5 guys and 4 girls, 5 males and 4 females. Joel and his girlfriend were Nico, but the rest were from various other races. They were tourists who came together and formed a tourist group, under the lead of an avian beast that ran a local tourism company. As Fenrir had identified them as honest and friendly, Lex had joined their group, at least until their next destination. After that, he would decide whether to stay with them or not. After all, there was no better way to understand aliens on vacation other than to join them. As usual, Lex leapt onto Fenrir's back, and the duo went into the forest hunting for fruit. Lex had tried hunting for actual game, but there didn't seem to be many animals near the tourist areas. While Fenrir ran, Lex's mind wandered back to what Mary had told him about Tetsuya. He had not had much of a reaction to learning about the inn, or even that he had been saved despite the seriousness of his wounds. He simply bought a travel face wash kit, which allowed him to change his appearance for 24 hours, and left the inn. Let alone Lex, even Mary was confused by his behavior. But there was nothing either of them could do about it. After gathering enough fruit, Lex returned to the campsite and shared his harvest with the group. Since he was tagging along, it was only right that he contributed in some way to the group. After breakfast, they left for their next tourist destination, Heaven Island. This was a popular destination because of the unusual feature that the island was floating. This was not a man-made island, but was one naturally formed. According to the tourist guide, the reason the island floated was because the island was originally a massive asteroid that had unusual magnetic properties. It floated around constantly in the sky above a large canyon and was completely unable to leave the canyon's boundaries. It was suspected that the canyon emitted a certain spiritual field that prevented the island from falling, but also from moving out of the canyon itself. After a brief study conducted by the Dimitri family revealed that the island did not contain any extremely rare ores, they renovated the top enough to accommodate plant life, and turned it into a tourist destination. After extensive study, as well as communication with the locals, Lex learned that all the planets in the X-14 system had a strong tourism industry going. The reason, as far as Lex could tell, was that since all planets were firmly under the control of the Dimitri family, there was no room for internal strife. The planets were not divided into countries, but zones according to their agricultural produce, and none of the tourist attractions were anywhere near important agricultural lands. The lack of large-scale internal strife, presence of security and various attractions focused towards different species made the planet's prime location for a booming industry. For example, while Lex was heading towards the island, he learned that swamps were a major attraction towards slimes. Another interesting and unexpected thing Lex learned was that slimes were first-class citizens of the Jotun Empire. Apparently, as far as the brief description on the list provided by the Emporium told, not only were slimes born without a lifespan, meaning they would never die unless killed, they had an unequivocally strong backing, so much so that the Empire allowed them to travel their territory without any intergalactic visas. This did not match Lex's impression of the squishy, jelly-like beings that could change their bodies to immediately become excellent trampolines, but he decided to accept it. The universe was a strange place, he had to be flexible in this thinking. The group Lex was with did not travel by train, but by a vehicle called hover plates. It was literally what it sounded like. It was a large, flat platform that rose into the air and flew in the direction you wanted. Of course, it had several formations on it to control how much wind blew into the tray so the riders wouldn't be bothered, and to prevent them from falling off. Once they arrived at the island, they checked into a hotel for 2 days, after which they would continue on their journey elsewhere. Although Lex didn't have a booking, he spent nearly all the spirit coins he brought with himself to get a room. This was really good for his research. He would take detailed notes about the hotel and reflect on how he could improve the inn. Darius was sitting in his room, smoking out of a pipe while he watched a show. It had been a while since he hired someone to look for that kid he had a fight with, and though they didn't reach out to him yet, he was confident in their abilities. After all, he had worked with them before. Suddenly, however, the door to his room was kicked down and his father entered the room with a look of such fury on his face that Darius had never seen anything close to it. He didn't know what had sparked his father's anger, but he had a strong guess. He had to maintain his innocence. "Father," he began saying, but before he could continue, he was slapped across the face so hard his body hurled across the room. Confused, in pain, and panicking, Darius tried to look at his attack to understand what exactly was happening. That's when he noticed them. There was a group of guards, all wearing the uniform of the Dimitri family's elite forces. At their head stood a middle-aged man wearing office clothes, but there was no doubt for even a second that he was in command. "Little brat, before you start speaking, it'll be best if you hear me first. I don't care whether you were involved or not in the terrorist attack or not, since you had an enmity with the only victim, you're already on the suspects list. Do you know what that means? It means you've already been sentenced to death, without a trial." Darius physically felt his stomach lurch, and his heart stopped beating for a moment as he listened to the man. No, he couldn't die. But just as he was about to speak again, the man reached forward and clamped Darius' mouth shut with his hand. "Whether you did anything or not, you're already guilty. I'll give you one chance to speak, so I better hear something that'll help me trace those terrorists. If I hear something I like, maybe I'll reduce your punishment. Otherwise, I'll personally make sure there's nothing left of you to put into a grave." With that, the man let go of Darius' mouth and took a step back to let him speak. By now, Darius' mind had almost shut down from fear. He could not think, not even of a way to save himself. His eyes shifted to his dad, but instead of support, he only saw unbridled anger. After a few moments, when he didn't answer, the man no longer bothered wasting any time with him. He stepped forth and injected some serum into his neck. A minute later, he asked, "What connection do you have with the terrorists?" "They reached out to me a few weeks back," Darius answered, his mind completely numbed now, and his eyes vacant. "It was the day Tetsuya broke through to the Foundation realm, and he had beaten me up badly when I tried to ambush him during an academy trip. They offered to kill Tetsuya for me, as long as I did them a favor. I used my connections to distract one of the guards in the space station in the city, the one for people traveling to and from this planet. It was barely for a few minutes, and nothing happened, but they considered the favor done. After that, they didn't contact me again for so long I thought someone was playing a prank on me. Until they sent me a video of them killing Tetsuya." The man nodded, as if he heard exactly what he expected. He turned to one of the men behind him and said, "Interrogate him thoroughly. Get all the information we need. Once you're done, kill him." Darius did not react, as his mind was still numb, but his father did. Instead of feeling aggrieved, he was instead relieved. If they killed Darius, their anger should be reduced. Or at least, that's what he thought until the middle-aged man turned to him and said, "For raising such a treasonous child, you share in the blame of his crime for not providing a better upbringing. You better start thinking of ways you can help with the investigation, or your execution will be next. The father fell on his knees. He was doomed. Chapter 215. Track me down. Lex took a long, deep breath and held it in for a moment before he let out a sigh of relaxation. Other than that small brush with near death on his first day, his trip on X-142 had been as different from his trips to other worlds as possible. This was already his 8th day on the planet, and he was expecting the connection to form with the any day now. He had spent these days traveling and relaxing, and though he ran out of money very quickly, that only made traveling even more interesting. Of course, despite the casual activities, he did not let his guard down again during the entire trip. But when he was lying on a beach chair, being served some kind of fruit juice by a sassy fairy that used her powers to levitate the tray behind her where she went, it was hard not to enjoy the moment. Often, he could not help but compare the fairy to Mary, since they were similar in size. At least, most of the time. Mary could change the size of her projection to whatever size she wanted, but mostly maintained her tiny stature. "Hey Lex, we're about to head out. You want to join?" asked a young man. "Yeah, give me a moment. I'll join you," said Lex as he finally picked himself up. He was on a beach, and while he normally wasn't one for sunbathing, this beach was surrounded by a formation that helped in cultivating under direct sunlight. The aid of the formation, along with the ointment he took from the Infinity Emporium, boosted his cultivation speed considerably. He had managed to increase the total number of chi strands in his body to 32. At 33 strands of chi, he'd reached the limit of the 3rd level of chi training, and at 34 he'd officially enter the 4th level. Each level consisted of absorbing 11 strands of chi, and while growing within each level was easy, relatively speaking, going from one level to the next was always a challenge. Of course, to onlookers, it merely looked like Lex rubbed himself in sunscreen and spent the day sleeping on the beach chair in his shorts. He stretched for a bit after getting up, winked to the fairy that had been passing comments on his body all day, and left to convince Fenrir to get out of the water. The same way Lex had been lying on the beach non-stop, Fenrir had been swimming in the ocean, occasionally catching some fish while he was at it. Getting him out was a greater challenge than Lex expected, and he only agreed when Lex promised to let him hunt something on land as well. It seemed like the pup was developing a knack of hunting. Once they were ready, Lex joined Tina and Tima, 2 human twins who were touring the planet during their vacations from what Lex assumed was the equivalent of college. They were 19 years old, and though their cultivation was still in the body-tempering phase, they were more inclined towards normal life, anyway. They did not have much talent for cultivation, and the little that they did cultivate was under parental pressure, mostly for the health benefits. Their destination this time was an oasis in the only desert on the planet. They all sat in what looked like a massive jeep, and let the automated driving feature take them towards their destination. The journey was about 6 hours long, and halfway through it Lex got the notification that the inn had successfully been connected to X-142, and he could leave whenever he wanted. Lex smiled. This was his favorite venture to another planet so far. Yet, when has life been simple and straightforward? On the way to the oasis, once they had already entered the desert, they encountered 3 vehicles stopped in the middle of nowhere. Smoke was coming out of the farthest one, rising high up into the clear sky like a beacon, and it seemed like the other 2 had stopped to help. "Should we check if they need help?" Tina asked, looking at her brother. "I guess it can't really hurt," Tima replied, shrugging, and input commands to slow down the vehicle. Since he was just tagging along with them, Lex didn't give any opinion on the matter. He was just waiting till he reached the oasis, so he could get out of sight and teleport away without arousing any suspicion. "Hey, is everyone alright?" Tima yelled once they had stopped nearby and jumped out into the sand. Tina was looking for a water bottle in case they needed it, and Lex was also getting ready to disembark and see if he could help, when Fenrir let out a low growl. Lex was immediately alerted, as for the first time the pup took the initiative to communicate with him through his feelings, and he was communicating only one specific feeling that was slowly getting stronger: danger. Fenrir's ability to sense others' emotions was unimpaired by cultivation levels, as Lex had learnt, and was very accurate. Lex quickly turned and noticed that the crowd that had gathered near the 3rd vehicle were all dressed oddly. Lex had gotten a sense for how people dressed on X-142, and it was mostly very casual. These people, however, seemed to be fully equipped with some kind of tactical equipment. Suddenly, Fenrir let out a yelp as he ducked low. His communication this time was even more clear. They were much stronger than Lex and Fenrir, and they had decided to kill all of them. "Tina, don't get out of the car," Lex whispered, his tone extremely grave, and without explaining he quickly jumped out and ran to Tima. "Get in the cart and run," Lex told him quickly, before he raised his hand up in the air holding some kind of device. "If anyone moves, I'll fire the SOS beacon." Lex yelled at the crowd. "What's going on?" Tima asked, still confused. He had lived his entire life on a planet unmarred by major conflict, and with little to no crime. The fact that others might want to harm him was not something he could even conceive. Yet while Tima was confused, the crowds clearly understood what was happening. They didn't know what it was that gave away their intentions, or maybe their identity, but they didn't care. They all turned towards Lex, and eyed the device in his hand as if trying to judge if he was lying. An SOS beacon sent out an emergency distress signal to the nearest city or town, and alerted all emergency services. If Lex fired one off, within 15 minutes max, this place would be swarming with police and rescue forces. Tima, there's something very wrong with these people, get in the damn car and drive. Lex yelled this time, as he did not have the time to explain to the teenager. Or do you want to be responsible for Tina's death? That seemed to get the message across, and the teenager was suddenly afraid. But still, before he retreated, he stopped to ask, what about you? I'll be fine, I have protective gear. You need to get out of here. Go. Although Tima did not understand what was happening, he turned around and ran. The people did not move to pursue Tima, and instead looked at Lex with amusement. In fact, their cavalier attitude told Lex that they didn't even care about the SOS anymore. Whoever they were, and whatever they were doing, maybe they had contingency plans in case they got discovered. Hey kid, do you know who you're messing with? One of the men asked, as he slowly started walking towards Lex. Don't move or I'll fire the beacon. Lex yelled, once again. Fire the beacon, see if I care, the man said, not slowing down his pace at all. By now, Tima and Tina had started their vehicle and were already leaving, but Lex noticed one of the people aiming some kind of weapon towards them. "Ah, to hell with it," Lex said, suddenly losing his worried look, his expression turning into a casual smile. He fired the device in his hand, which was not an SOS beacon, but a regular flare from Earth. He did not know if anyone would see it, but it was no longer his concern. Without any outward indication, Lex flawlessly entered the state of flow and drew the heavy Harley, firing a perfectly aimed shot towards the man aiming at the twins' vehicle. The man did not bother to dodge, as his cultivation was much higher than Lex, and could easily determine that this weapon could not hurt him, but was caught by surprise when the bullet hit his weapon instead of him, throwing off his aim. Interesting, the first man, who was walking towards Lex, said. Are you, a third-level chi training cultivator, playing games with us? So what if I am? So what if I'm not? What can you do about it? Lex replied, his casual voice making it perfectly clear that he was not afraid of the man. At the same time, he fired off a couple more shots, disrupting them from firing at the teenagers. They were quite a distance away by now, but Lex did not know the range of their weapons, so maintained the interference. You're protecting those kids, but aren't you worried about yourself? Not at all. I'm standing right here, what can you do to me? The man, as if aggravated, fired off a brown-colored beam from his finger towards Lex, but before it got anywhere near him, a translucent blue energy shield appeared around him and blocked the attack effortlessly. This was a protective treasure Lex bought from the Emporium, capable of even defending against nascent-level attacks, and the source of Lex's confidence. Well, so you have some protection. But can that protect you forever? Even if we can't break it now, we've already seen what you look like. Aren't you afraid we'll track you down and kill you? Ha! Lex almost burst into laughter, but had to control himself. Sure, if you can, then go ahead and track me down. Hoping the teenagers were far enough by now, Lex decided to stop tempting fate. He threw out all the explosives he had in his backpack at the man, activated the key he got from the Emporium, summoned all the things he bought, and teleported back to the inn with all his things. When the smoke from the various explosions cleared, the man was completely unharmed. In fact, even his clothes were not damaged by the explosions. His eyes, though, wore a grave look as they stared in the place Lex stood before he disappeared. Did you get a picture of the brat? He asked one of his followers. Yes, but there seems to be some interference. This image is different from his actual appearance. The man pursed his lips in annoyance, then put the matter behind him. Implement Plan C. Moving forward, assume our location and numbers have been revealed, but the Dmitri family still doesn't know our objective, so we can take advantage of that. What about the kids who got away? Forget them, since our location has already been exposed, there's no reason to chase them down. This group of people all seemed to be wearing the same kind of gear as the man who tried to assassinate Tetsuya, but since no one had seen them or the assassin, no one knew that there were dozens of enemies. The Dmitri family was still just hunting down that one terrorist, unaware of the danger that lurked hidden across the planet. After all, this was just one of the various groups that had infiltrated the planet. Chapter 216 Dragonburn Locket. Once Lex returned to his apartment at the inn, he automatically exited his state of flow and breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had planned to retreat at the first sign of trouble, and had various defensive treasures, facing an uncertain situation still weighed heavily on him. Fortunately, everything went well. He could only hope that Tina and Tima managed to get far enough away. "I'd like to see you track me down," Lex murmured once he finally relaxed, and chuckled. At worst, he would just not return to that planet, or even that star system. How would they ever find him? Fenrir, who had also returned to the inn as Lex dismissed his summoning, came and rubbed his massive face against Lex's body. Part of it was over his worry for Lex, and part of him was still reeling from his first experience with danger. Regardless of his size and heritage, he was still a pup of only a few weeks in age. After consoling him, Lex turned his attention to all things he had brought with him to the inn. After a week of rest, he had a lot of work to do, and that was not considering catching up with anything that had happened at the inn while he was gone. He directly sent the fertilizer meant for the delinquent vine, as well as the hundreds of seeds and saplings he bought directly to the turtle. He told the turtle to plant the more important ones in the greenhouse, and the rest all over the inn. He wasn't going to turn the entire inn into a farm, but if a wandering guest encountered a fruit tree and wanted to pick and eat some fruit, they would soon be able to. He had no use for the various ores and technology he bought for the Emporium, so he added a storeroom to his apartment and placed all the stuff he didn't currently need there. He also stashed all the spirit stones he bought there, as not only did he not know what to spend them on, he himself could not use them for cultivation yet. Spirit stones, as with everything else in the universe, it seemed, had different levels as well. The ones available at the Emporium were low, medium level, and very few high-leveled ones. Since Lex actually had a lot of credit at the store, and didn't want to leave it there, Lex had a massive amount of spirit stones of low and medium level. It was to the extent that if the Emporium had not employed some kind of shrinking technique and stuffed them all in a special kind of chest that would prevent their aura from leaking, Lex would have been crushed to death just by the spirit stones when he used the key to teleport all his belongings to him from the locker. Lex took the various files of information he bought and neatly placed them on a shelf in his study room. These were important, and he would go over them when he had the time. Then, Lex turned his attention to the mysterious locket he had bought that even the Emporium could not identify. On a surface level, the only special thing about this locket was that it was indestructible. Yet Lex did not believe it was so simple. Or at least, he hoped not. Lex had an amazing way of figuring out the locket's speciality. He put it in the gift shop, then read its description. Dragonburn locket. A locket that was forged in the fires of a master dragon's fire breath. A dragon can study the locket to gain a deeper understanding of the intricacies of breathing fire. Lex raised an eyebrow. The locket was not useful to him personally, but it was not a bad item to leave in the gift shop. The only question was, "Hey Mary, any idea on how I should price this item? Its description does not mention any realms at all, so I don't know what realm of dragons it's useful for. I'm checking your authority, and it seems, yes, you can learn something about dragons from the system, maybe that'll help you. Dragons are a very strong, very proud, and very individualistic race. They do not focus on growing as a civilization, and instead focus more on personal growth, or at most, the growth of their individual clans. On a universal scale, their threat is greatly diminished due to their lack of unity, but on a one-to-one scale, few species exist that can match, let alone supersede, the might of a pure-blooded dragon. Dragons are greatly loved by the laws of the universe, and often, natural treasures will bloom near them. The natural accumulation of treasures around dragons, over time, gave birth to the misconception that dragons love treasures. Well, it tells me that dragons are usually rich, but I still don't know how to price the item. Well, if you don't know, just pick a random price. It's not like you're suffering any losses either way. Lex pondered for a moment. Since even the system thought they were rich, or at least had many treasures, it would be alright if overcharged a bit, right? Unsure of what exactly constitutes rich on a universal scale, Lex decided to price the item 10 million MP. If, after a long time, no one bought it, maybe he'd reduce the price. With that done, Lex turned his attention towards the inn, finally. Alright Mary, give me the updates on what's been happening while I was gone. Well, since you connected all the planets from the 3 star systems, we've had a lot more guests coming in from the Golden Doors. Some of them decided to stay, most of them left immediately. It seems you might need to improve the welcome message delivered by the holographic assistant. Finally, some of the beasts from the planets around Nibiru have caused trouble. Although the higher cultivation ones seem to already know about the inn, and haven't caused any trouble, those at lower levels have caused problems a few times. Were you able to resolve the problems? For now, yes. But not only do you need to invest in growing the vine more, you need to look into other forms of security as well. As more and more races come to the inn, the harder it will be to control them all by simply using the vine. After all, each race has its own strengths and weaknesses. All it will take is someone good at controlling fire, and the vine will suffer great damage. Yes, I know. I've been thinking of other ways to improve security, you don't need to remind me. That's why I'm only focused on connecting to low-level planets for now, to avoid the chance of stronger guests till we're ready. What else has happened at the inn? Some people with the skills you were looking for at the inn showed up. Though they've already left the inn, you can still look at their information. That reminds me, I have a few candidates in mind for certain jobs. Is there any way I can hire them without having to go to them personally? If you'd managed to hire Marlowe as a valet, finding people on the various planets was a job that could have been left to him. Currently, you still don't have the ability to reach out to specific people on various planets using the system unless it's through the event panel. As your authority increases, you'll be able to eventually do it. For now, I guess the first person you should consider hiring is someone you can trust with tasks that require visiting the various planets. Lex had guessed as much, and then took a deep sigh of regret. He had already thought of someone he wanted to hire for the job of collecting news, but to hire him, Lex would have to travel to Vegas Maxima, one of the 3 inhabited planets in the Vegas system. The situation there should be a lot better with the presence of the Jotun forces, yet Lex still didn't want to risk it. He'd already seen immortal zombies and extremely strong devils, so he wanted to stay as far away from those planets as possible. Anything else I should know about? Oh yeah, Marlowe's son finally woke up while you were gone. That attracted Lex's attention. It need not be said that Marlowe was one of the most prominent guests Lex had, and he suspected that this would not change anytime soon. Lex scanned the inn to find that Marlowe, Sophia and Raphael were outside the recovery room while Raphael was in the ORR, receiving treatment. When Raphael had been brought to the inn, he was seriously injured, and was not only amputated, he was missing several organs as well. Now, at least his face had fully recovered while the rest of his body was still undergoing treatment. Although Raphael's eyes were open, they were vacant, with no signs of intelligence behind them. Lex expected as much, since his soul was gravely injured. Marlowe should still be working on getting something to heal the soul. Lex paused, because when he checked Raphael's status, he saw something extremely unusual. Once again, feeling like he owed it to Marlowe to let him know what was happening due to their relationship, he wore his host attire and teleported directly to them. I was checking up on the patient, and thought I'd update you, he said with a smile to the couple. This time, though, I only have good news. Chapter 217 Xeon. Already familiar with the innkeeper somewhat now, Sophia put a great deal of stock in whatever he had to say, which is why all her attention was now focused on the innkeeper. She did not find it strange at all that the innkeeper teleported so abruptly, or that he immediately started speaking without any preamble. Everyone who spent some time at the inn knew that the innkeeper had a tendency to appear and disappear as he wished. Lex observed Raphael's status one more time before he spoke. Name, Raphael Carter Bravi. Age, 37. Sex, male. Cultivation details, crippled. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition. Because a majority of the patient's body is newly constructed, or is still undergoing reconstruction, it is taking time for the soul to adjust to the new vessel. However, the soul is being quickly replenished and strengthened by an artifact within the patient's heart. Letting the patient stay in the ORR until the rest of the body undergoes reconstruction is recommended. Remarks, if it is one's destiny to die, the universe itself cannot stop it. If one is destined to live, then the universe itself will bend itself around you to provide the conditions for you to live. He felt like he should leave the matter about the artifact out, as he should afford the man some privacy at least. After all, although he himself was not aware, he was also a guest at the inn. Not to mention, an artifact that not only keeps him from dying for 15 years but also heals the soul was ridiculously rare as far as Lex knew, so the fewer people that knew about it, the better. As your son's body is being reconstructed, his soul is also automatically healing itself. Although it's unexpected, it's not unprecedented. So, congratulations. Your son should recover completely soon. Sophia trembled as heard the news, and couldn't stop tears from falling from her eyes. Despite all the resentment that had built up over the years, she instinctively hugged Marlowe and squeezed with all her might as she tried to control her emotions. Thank you for the news, was all Marlowe said, as he held his wife in his embrace. His voice was just as even as when he was telling Lex his son's story. He was a strong man, in more ways than one. After checking up on the situation one more time, Lex left to give the couple their privacy. He had many things to take care of. Xeon was tired. Not physically, although that drain was also there, but his exhaustion was mental. As a preeminent celebrity, exceptional artist, and all-in-all genius in the way of crafting and refining, he never got a moment's rest. Everywhere he went, he would be swarmed by a crowd of admirers, asking for autographs or requesting him to make jewelry or equipment. For goodness sakes, all he did was craft a crown that made its wearer 10,000% more likely to encounter an epiphany under the nascent realm, and a necklace that absorbed harmful radiation and released it as gentle spirit energy for the wearer to absorb. Was that any reason to overwhelm him? As far as he was concerned, it was not even his best work, visually speaking, of course. The exhausted Drake opened the window of his 30-story castle, but was immediately inundated by the cheers of endless crowds. Immediately, he closed the window again. This is what he got for accidentally being discovered for hiding his identity and helping ordinary people by crafting them gold-grade equipment. What he wouldn't give to get away from it all. As if in answer to his prayer, a magnificently carved, golden door appeared in front of his eyes, hovering midair. He felt a welcoming call from the door, as if freedom lay just a step away. He didn't even care how suspicious this was. He needed to get away from all females, and some males, who kept hurling themselves at him in the heat of lust. So, without any planning or precaution, the Drake stepped through the door. Half an hour later, a suspiciously dressed man sneaked into the room where Xeon had left from, and searched. After ensuring the Drake was not hiding, the man called someone. Team leader, the target has disappeared. He is not at home. Continue hiding. If he doesn't reappear in a week, we can only applaud the Dimitri family for being exceptionally cautious. Understood, the man replied before retreating into the shadows. He was not here for an assassination, but to kidnap his target. He did not often fail his missions, but in the scenario where the target disappeared, there was nothing he could do except wait and hope for his return. When Xeon stepped through the door, he received a prompt asking him if he wanted to hide his identity. Although he did not know where he was going, his deepest fear was being recognized once again, so he selected yes and wore the glasses that appeared in front of him. The Drake found himself standing in front of a manor, surrounded by vast open fields and a clear blue sky. The air was so clean, breathing felt like he was partaking in a delicacy. As a Drake, with much sharper senses than many other species like humans, he was extremely sensitive to noise and air pollution. It was also for this reason that he enjoyed the atmosphere at the inn more than others as well. This wasn't even considering the concentration and purity of spirit energy in the air, that made him feel like each of his scales absorbing the energy in the air and growing stronger naturally. Two humans stood in front of the manor, and it seemed like they had been talking before Xeon's arrival, but now he had attracted their attention. He silently lamented in his heart. Such was the burden of a genius. Even with his identity hidden, he became the center of attention. It seemed gold would always shine. Welcome guest, to the Midnight Inn. I am the innkeeper, owner of this humble establishment. You look tired. Would you like to rest by our lovely and peaceful lake? It is most relaxing. Xeon was surprised. Firstly, he was not expecting to arrive at an inn. Secondly, he did not expect this innkeeper was so insightful as to be able to immediately guess what he needed. Why yes, that sounds lovely, Xeon said happily. You said this is an inn? Can you tell me more about it? I desperately need a vacation. Lex walked side by side with the massive, 5 feet tall and 8 feet long Drake, completely undeterred by the sharp contrast in the appearance and personality of his guest. He looked like a living, breathing war machine, with talons so sharp they could pierce through bones like butter and glossy but heavy-looking scales. Along his spine and all the way to the edge of his tail ran some kind of exoskeleton, black, with sharp grooves and ridges. His eyes were that of an apex predator and his fangs looked like they had come out of a horror movie. His personality, however, was like that of a child. Of course, Lex had barely talked with him and so it was too soon to judge, but he had a strong gut feeling about him. He recalled the Drake's status. Name, Xeon. Age, 112. Sex, male. Cultivation details, golden core. Species, Drake. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, volcanic Drake. Condition. Suffering from severe mental exhaustion from being worshipped for too long. Rest and relaxation are recommended. Remarks, it is not without reason that dragons look down on drakes, but some try harder than others to shame their lineage. As they walked, Lex introduced the inn to the Drake, giving him the usual spiel about catering to the whole universe etc. The more the Drake heard, the happier it became. In the grand scheme of things, his popularity was probably infinitesimal. There was probably no other guest in the entire inn who knew about him, which meant that he would no longer be endlessly hounded so long as he was here. He had not even reached the lake yet, and already the Drake was feeling good. Lex, however, was thinking about something else. He either had to get Gerard a new vehicle, or he seriously needed to find someone to upgrade it according to his requirements. If more Drakes showed up, they could not chauffeur it around in a tiny cart as they simply would not fit, and if they had to be walked everywhere, it would take forever. Speaking of Gerard, Lex had just been talking to him in front of the manor. The old-looking man had started showing signs of his age regressing because he was already at the peak of QI training. Lex wanted to rip his own hair out. Not that he wasn't happy for Gerard, but he was the one with the system, so wasn't he supposed to be the fastest in cultivating? If compared to the standards on Earth, his cultivation was increasing like a rocket. But when compared to Gerard, Lex felt like he was barely moving. To give reference to Gerard's incredible speed of cultivation, it must be remembered that it took Alexander 2 years to break into the Foundation realm, and he set a world record. Gerard, technically speaking, had barely been cultivating for 2 months. Not only that, Gerard informed Lex that he felt like his bloodline was about to have a breakthrough, and requested a small break so he could focus on that. Lex really needed to step up his own game. Already familiar with the Innkeeper somewhat now, Sophia put a great deal of stock in whatever he had to say, which is why all her attention was now focused on the Innkeeper. She did not find it strange at all that the Innkeeper teleported so abruptly, or that he immediately started speaking without any preamble. Everyone who spent some time at the inn knew that the Innkeeper had a tendency to appear and disappear as he wished. Lex observed Raphael's status one more time before he spoke. Name, Raphael Carter Bravi. Age, 37. Sex, male. Cultivation details, crippled. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition. Because a majority of the patient's body is newly constructed, or is still undergoing reconstruction, it is taking time for the soul to adjust to the new vessel. However, the soul is being quickly replenished and strengthened by an artifact within the patient's heart. Letting the patient stay in the ORR until the rest of the body undergoes reconstruction is recommended. Remarks, if it is one's destiny to die, the universe itself cannot stop it. If one is destined to live, then the universe itself will bend itself around you to provide the conditions for you to live. He felt like he should leave the matter about the artifact out, as he should afford the man some privacy at least. After all, although he himself was not aware, he was also a guest at the inn. Not to mention, an artifact that not only keeps him from dying for 15 years but also heals the soul was ridiculously rare as far as Lex knew, so the fewer people that knew about it, the better. As your son's body is being reconstructed, his soul is also automatically healing itself. Although it's unexpected, it's not unprecedented. So, congratulations. Your son should recover completely soon. Sophia trembled as heard the news, and couldn't stop tears from falling from her eyes. Despite all the resentment that had built up over the years, she instinctively hugged Marlowe and squeezed with all her might as she tried to control her emotions. Thank you for the news, was all Marlowe said, as he held his wife in his embrace. His voice was just as even as when he was telling Lex his son's story. He was a strong man, in more ways than one. After checking up on the situation one more time, Lex left to give the couple their privacy. He had many things to take care of. Xeon was tired. Not physically, although that drain was also there, but his exhaustion was mental. As a preeminent celebrity, exceptional artist, and all-in-all genius in the way of crafting and refining, he never got a moment's rest. Everywhere he went, he would be swarmed by a crowd of admirers, asking for autographs or requesting him to make jewelry or equipment. For goodness sakes, all he did was craft a crown that made its wearer 10,000% more likely to encounter an epiphany under the nascent realm, and a necklace that absorbed harmful radiation and released it as gentle spirit energy for the wearer to absorb. Was that any reason to overwhelm him? As far as he was concerned, it was not even his best work, visually speaking, of course. The exhausted Drake opened the window of his 30-story castle, but was immediately inundated by the cheers of endless crowds. Immediately, he closed the window again. This is what he got for accidentally being discovered for hiding his identity and helping ordinary people by crafting them gold-grade equipment. What he wouldn't give to get away from it all. As if in answer to his prayer, a magnificently carved, golden door appeared in front of his eyes, hovering midair. He felt a welcoming call from the door, as if freedom lay just a step away. He didn't even care how suspicious this was. He needed to get away from all females, and some males, who kept hurling themselves at him in the heat of lust. So, without any planning or precaution, the Drake stepped through the door. Half an hour later, a suspiciously dressed man sneaked into the room where Xeon had left from, and searched. After ensuring the Drake was not hiding, the man called someone. Team leader, the target has disappeared. He is not at home. Continue hiding. If he doesn't reappear in a week, we can only applaud the Dimitri family for being exceptionally cautious. Understood, the man replied before retreating into the shadows. He was not here for an assassination, but to kidnap his target. He did not often fail his missions, but in the scenario where the target disappeared, there was nothing he could do except wait and hope for his return. When Xeon stepped through the door, he received a prompt asking him if he wanted to hide his identity. Although he did not know where he was going, his deepest fear was being recognized once again, so he selected yes and wore the glasses that appeared in front of him. The Drake found himself standing in front of a manor, surrounded by vast open fields and a clear blue sky. The air was so clean, breathing felt like he was partaking in a delicacy. As a Drake, with much sharper senses than many other species like humans, he was extremely sensitive to noise and air pollution. It was also for this reason that he enjoyed the atmosphere at the inn more than others as well. This wasn't even considering the concentration and purity of spirit energy in the air, that made him feel like each of his scales absorbing the energy in the air and growing stronger naturally. Two humans stood in front of the manor, and it seemed like they had been talking before Xion's arrival, but now he had attracted their attention. He silently lamented in his heart. Such was the burden of a genius. Even with his identity hidden, he became the center of attention. It seemed gold would always shine. Welcome, guest, to the Midnight Inn. I am the innkeeper, owner of this humble establishment. You look tired. Would you like to rest by our lovely and peaceful lake? It is most relaxing. Xion was surprised. Firstly, he was not expecting to arrive at an inn. Secondly, he did not expect this innkeeper was so insightful as to be able to immediately guess what he needed. Why yes, that sounds lovely, Xion said happily. You said this is an inn? Can you tell me more about it? I desperately need a vacation. Lex walked side by side with the massive, 5 feet tall and 8 feet long Drake, completely undeterred by the sharp contrast in the appearance and personality of his guest. He looked like a living, breathing war machine, with talons so sharp they could pierce through bones like butter and glossy but heavy-looking scales. Along his spine and all the way to the edge of his tail ran some kind of exoskeleton, black, with sharp grooves and ridges. His eyes were that of an apex predator and his fangs looked like they had come out of a horror movie. His personality, however, was like that of a child. Of course, Lex had barely talked with him and so it was too soon to judge, but he had a strong gut feeling about him. He recalled the Drake's status. Name, Xion. Age, 112. Sex, male. Cultivation details, golden core. Species, Drake. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, volcanic Drake. Condition. Suffering from severe mental exhaustion from being worshipped for too long. Rest and relaxation are recommended. Remarks, it is not without reason that dragons look down on drakes, but some try harder than others to shame their lineage. As they walked, Lex introduced the inn to the Drake, giving him the usual spiel about catering to the whole universe etc. The more the Drake heard, the happier it became. In the grand scheme of things, his popularity was probably infinitesimal. There was probably no other guest in the entire inn who knew about him, which meant that he would no longer be endlessly hounded so long as he was here. He had not even reached the lake yet, and already the Drake was feeling good. Lex, however, was thinking about something else. He either had to get Gerard a new vehicle, or he seriously needed to find someone to upgrade it according to his requirements. If more Drakes showed up, they could not chauffeur it around in a tiny cart as they simply would not fit, and if they had to be walked everywhere, it would take forever. Speaking of Gerard, Lex had just been talking to him in front of the manor. The old-looking man had started showing signs of his age regressing because he was already at the peak of QI training. Lex wanted to rip his own hair out. Not that he wasn't happy for Gerard, but he was the one with the system, so wasn't he supposed to be the fastest in cultivating? If compared to the standards on Earth, his cultivation was increasing like a rocket. But when compared to Gerard, Lex felt like he was barely moving. To give reference to Gerard's incredible speed of cultivation, it must be remembered that it took Alexander 2 years to break into the Foundation realm, and he set a world record. Gerard, technically speaking, had barely been cultivating for 2 months. Not only that, Gerard informed Lex that he felt like his bloodline was about to have a breakthrough, and requested a small break so he could focus on that. Lex really needed to step up his own game. Chapter 218 Prestige Levels. Once they arrived at the lake, Xion comfortably nestled himself on a massive recliner Lex had designed specifically for beasts, and simply decided to enjoy being around people without being the center of attention. He was intrigued about how people behaved in their free time, and what they normally did. More than the relaxing environment, it was the anonymity that he enjoyed. Making sure that he did not need anything else, Lex left. During his research on the X-142 planet, the one thing he discovered wasn't that he lacked many of the common features of a luxury resort, such as a spa or massage clinic. No, what Lex realized was that he had not given enough emphasis to his special features. He did not need to replicate the facilities of other places, he needed to focus on what made him special and expand it. He looked at his MP, and noticed that he had only made a profit of 12,000 MP in the week he was gone, a result of his various services and items sold in the gift shop. This made his total MP at 4,942,000. He looked at the various rooms he had, at least the ones provided by the system. He had the guild room, meditation room, mystery trial, which wasn't really a room but it was provided by the system and Lex earned a hefty profit from it, the various recovery rooms and the training room. The first thing Lex did was upgrade each of the rooms to the maximum he could with his authority, which was the same as his authority, level 4. The mystery trial, of course, was not included in these since Lex could not directly upgrade that. The next thing he did was to increase the number of rooms. He expanded his recovery room to the size of a proper hospital building, so that it could easily accommodate more patients. He turned the training room on Main Street into a high-rise tower, with each floor being a training room. This was the second high-rise in the Midnight and Skyline, but Lex had already come to accept that he would end up having at least one metropolitan area as he expanded. The guild room was unique in that Lex did not need multiple versions of it, as just a single one could cater to the needs of all his guests. Furthermore, while the other rooms only enhanced the service they provided as they were upgraded or added slight enhancements, such as the training room providing a playback feature of the trainee when they used their techniques, the guild room gained a couple entirely new features. While Lex found most of the new features barely a moderate improvement, such as allowing guests to post requests to the guild from anywhere in the inn and a small notification to someone whenever their request was completed, regardless of whether they were in the inn or not, there was one he found particularly impressive. A feature offered by the gift shop was that when someone bought an item, they delivered the item in a compressed form of a card, which could then be converted back into the original item whenever the user required. The new feature of the guild was that they commissioned empty such cards called requisition cards, which the person would have to purchase separately, of course. But these cards could not be used randomly, as they served a very specific purpose. A person accepting a request that would require the submission of certain materials could take the card, and then absorb the item directly into the card when they were back on the planet they came from. At that point, the card would automatically teleport to the inn, and submit the material to the guild room. Since the card had a limit to the amount of material it could absorb, this wasn't a perfect solution for everyone. But it did add an element of convenience. Most importantly, it gave Lex hope that one day the inn would provide him some way to instantly store any item he wanted in a separate space. The system inventory was too picky in this matter. The improvement in the meditation room was not anything new, it still helped with cultivation and understanding, just with a stronger effect now. It did not sound phenomenal, but sometimes, that was enough. The meditation room did not require any bells and whistles, just improving its existing functions was more than enough. With these things taken care of, Lex was planning on meeting with Harry to see how he could help Harry grow his abilities, but was informed by Mary that Alexander wanted to meet him. As his first big client, Lex had a special fondness for Alexander, and so did not waste any time in scanning the inn and appearing near his location. He was with his grandmother, Audrey, and the two of them were sitting alone in one of the secluded viewpoints of the Midnight Mountain. Lex immediately sensed that the mood was somewhat unusual, but guessed it had to do with the fact that Helen still had not returned to the inn after so long. Innkeeper, the grandchild and grandmother duo greeted him together. Their tone was formal, as usual, but they carried an air of solemnity about them. Considering the fact that even Audrey was being so serious, this might be about more than just the girl. Please, be at ease. What can I do for you? Alexander exchanged looks with his grandmother once, before he turned to the innkeeper and said, I remember you once mentioned prestige levels and their perks. With my current spending, I should be around prestige level 3, right? Lex was surprised. To be honest, he completely forgot that prestige was even a thing, other than just a category on the status screen. He scanned Alexander to check his status. Name, Alexander Morrison. Age, 17. Sex, male. Cultivation details, initial foundation realm. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 3. Remarks, a walking, talking main character without the tragic backstory. Rob him blind, give him something to be sad about. Indeed, your current prestige level is 3, Lex told him, as he quickly checked on the perks each level gave mentally. Prestige level 1. Can receive glasses equipped with Clark Kent effect, only work while at the inn. Prestige level 2. Can instantly teleport to the inn from anywhere in the universe once, great for escaping enemies. Prestige level 3. Can travel to one-way a world connected to the inn, can only be used once every 10 years. Prestige level 4. 5% discount on all inn services, access to special services, allow you to use any inn service once, every 10 years, while not at the inn, effective meditation room while cultivation, recovery pod, etc. The 4th prestige level was new, and probably unlocked with his increased authority. But since literally not a single person had used their prestige perk, other than the glasses to hide your identity, Lex had not even remembered to check it out. Alright, well, I'd like to use the perk awarded to me by my level 3 prestige and travel to Vegas Minima. Are you sure? It's a one-way trip, meaning you will not be able to return to Earth or Mars. At least, you won't be able to return for the next 10 years, until the perk resets. Yes, I'm sure. Whether it's Earth, Mars or even the new minor realm, my family can handle them fine without my aid. The best way for me to contribute to the family, and speed up my own progress, is to leave and head out on my own. For a moment, Lex didn't know if he admired Alexander or thought he was idiotic. Leaving the comfort of home and going to face the unknown required a lot of courage. Then again, there were probably millions of people who would literally kill to be in his position, but he was giving it to take risks that may harm him greatly. Well, alright then. Are you ready? I can send you off whenever you need. Yes, I'm ready, he said, as he picked up a backpack. Is there somewhere in particular on the planet you want to go? Lex asked as he prepared to activate the system. He learned that being able to pick a location not blocked by protective formations to be teleported to. Even then, the restriction of the protective formations wasn't because the system couldn't teleport there, but to honor the privacy of the planet's inhabitants. Otherwise, people could directly teleport into bank vaults or secure locations and cause havoc. Yes, I've already discussed my arrival with Lieutenant Slag, who will then help me enroll in the army. So, I would like to be teleported to him. Upon discovering that the system considered that an acceptable target, Lex looked at Alexander one last time, before teleporting the boy away. His life would be drastically different now, but Lex was rooting for him. Then he turned to look at Audrey and asked, "This was a brave decision." "Not really," the breathtakingly beautiful woman replied. "His stupid father is too controlling, the boy needs a bit of freedom. Do you know, he still hasn't had a single girlfriend?" The woman genuinely seemed angry as she said that, before walking away. Try as he might, Lex could find no deep or hidden concern for the boy, disguised in her behavior. She must really want him to start dating. Chapter 219 Younger Generation. Once he was done with Alexander, Lex went to check up on Harry. The barber kid was doing exceptionally well. His cheeks had filled out a little and his eyes had vigor that he had lacked when Lex first met him. Lex could not tell heads or tails of his cultivation, but he was confident enough to cut the hair of several chi training cultivators each day, and that's all that Lex needed to know. When asked if there was something he needed, he blushed, and after thinking for a few moments, said he didn't need anything. He was thoroughly confused about what he was thinking, but if it was important, he would eventually reach out. John happened to be in the mystery trial, so Lex decided to skip meeting him for now. Done with these tasks, Lex returned to his room, rubbed himself down with the ointment he received, and started cultivating. Using his Leo persona, Lex had previously placed several orders of equipment and ammunition to be delivered at fixed intervals, both to Will and Chen. This way, he wouldn't need to ask them again each time he was done visiting a world, and avoid overlapping the appearance of Leo with the Innkeeper. As far as anyone was concerned, and according to what Leo told Z, Leo had to go to handle some personal affairs and would not appear for a long time. Once he received his next batch of equipment, he would head out to another planet. X-142 was a very suitable planet for the purpose of attracting clients for the expo in 6 months, but he would need more. Until then, however, Lex simply focused on his cultivation. 2 days later, Lex had managed to gather a total of 34 strands of chi and had entered the 4th level of chi training. He had no intentions of stopping training, however, as the feeling of getting stronger was actually quite addictive. Until... "Hey Lex, there's an unusual situation. You might want to pay attention to this." It was quite rare for Mary to interrupt his cultivation, as she would normally wait for one of his breaks, so the seriousness of the matter was apparent. Lex concluded his cultivation, stabilizing his absorbed chi, and got up. "What's the issue?" "One of the guests has gotten into an argument with one of the waitresses." Lex raised an eyebrow and quickly scanned the inn, found the problem and sighed. Lex was not surprised that the culprit was one of the teenagers from Troy Academy. "Shut your mouth, you stupid skank, I know what you were doing," hollered a girl ballistically at one of his waitresses. Lex did not have much personal interaction with this waitress, and did not know her name, but that did not mean he would let one of his workers get bullied. But he needed to understand the situation first, so he quietly listened. "Please, guest, it's nothing like that. You must be misunderstanding." "Misunderstand my ass," the overly privileged teenager yelled again. "You were flirting with my boyfriend. I saw how you were ogling him. Keep your skanky claws away from him or I'll make you regret it. You're lucky the principal has strictly banned us from fighting, or I'd be squeezing your head into the ground and shaving it bald." "I assure you," the waitress replied, panic and desperation in her voice, "I was not making any advances on the guest. He requested some help, and I was only inquiring." "Oh, you're calling me a liar? We can just ask Sean." "Hey Sean, did you call the skank?" The screaming girl turned towards her boyfriend. He was standing together with a group of friends, snickering as they whispered amongst themselves. When asked, he quickly denied asking the waitress for anything. Lex frowned. Since he could review any events happening at the inn at any time, he quickly rewinded and saw that the boy had indeed asked for the waitress specifically. In fact, when Lex heard some of the remarks the boys were passing when they called her, Lex's demeanor darkened. He scanned the inn and found the principal of the academy, who was sitting with a few friends and chatting in a restaurant in Avalon. Lex directly sent his voice and told him to show up at the location of the argument, ensuring the displeasure in his voice was evident. The principal nearly fell out of his seat when he recognized the voice, but Lex was already not paying attention anymore. As pissed off as he was, he slightly regretted that the screaming brat hadn't actually physically attacked at any time. That would have made the situation simpler to resolve. He could have directly retaliated. Before the fight could continue any further, and before Lex had to hear any more screaming, he took a deep breath to stabilize his mood, and teleported over. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked as soon as he appeared. His voice was neutral, and did not betray his true feelings, but it was loud and carried clearly to the ears of all who were watching. Many of his workers who were also watching breathed a sigh of relief, and hope twinkled in their eyes. The guests had a different sparkle in their eyes, as they avidly waited to watch the drama unfold. The screaming girl was not intimidated by the innkeeper's arrival, but instead became excited. She had grown in the lap of luxury, and was used to getting her way, but that did not mean that she was an idiot. She had a clear understanding of businesses, and she understood the extent they would go to preserve their image. Her reason for causing a commotion was valid, as the waitress had indeed been overly friendly with her boyfriend, in her opinion, and in such a scenario where she was in the right, along with her background, usually played out pretty much in the manner she wanted. It was unfortunate for her that her experience was limited to Earth where her background actually mattered, and that Lex did not have a boss he needed to appease by maintaining a positive relation with his customers, even the annoying ones. "This desperate skank here was throwing herself at my boyfriend," she explained to the innkeeper in a haughty voice. "Is that the kind of establishment you run here? Interfering in your guests' lives and taking what you want?" The girl was quite proud of her accusation, and just waiting for the innkeeper to start appeasing her. Lex looked at his waitress, who was staring back at him with hesitation and fear in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked her, his voice noticeably softer. The guest kept asking me to bring things for his friends. "I was only doing what the guest wanted," she replied, trying hard to keep herself from stuttering. "Lies. She's lying. She kept flirting with." "Stop," Lex said, his voice rippling through the air and freezing the screaming girl. He waved his hand, and a screen appeared in the air in front of everyone, displaying the events as they played out. Everyone watched, including the aggrieved waitress, as the boys kept taunting and flirting with the waitress. Something Lex didn't catch the first time, but noticed this time, was that one of the boys even tried to pinch her, and winked at her when she managed to avoid it. The situation was clear to everyone who watched it, and the screaming girl blushed with her fists clenched as she watched. It was evident that her boyfriend was the one harassing the waitress, but she couldn't accept it. But the situation was escalating, as their principal had also run over by now, and immediately panicked when he saw what the screen displayed. Unaware of what actually occurred, he thought it was the horrendous behavior of the boys that agitated the innkeeper. "I think it's obvious what really happened," Lex said, as he looked at the girl. To be honest, he really wanted to punish her in some way, but at the same time didn't want to go as far as to use violence. He controlled the agitation in his heart and suppressed his rising anger as he turned to the principal. "This is an establishment that takes care of its guests, but never at the expense of my staff. As this is the first time something like this has happened, I will let it go by simply banning the girl and those boys. Should it happen again, the repercussions won't be as simple as a ban. My gravest apologies, Innkeeper," the principal began, wiping the actual sweat off his forehead. "I promise you," something like. "I disagree," the girl screamed loudly, cutting the principal off, as she glared at the innkeeper. Not only had the innkeeper ignored her, and dictated a punishment for her to her principal, just the fact that he had exposed her and humiliated her in public drove her insane. Normally, she really knew what lines not to cross, but as a spoiled child experiencing anything but adoration and support, the logical part of her brain was overridden by her erupting anger. Of course, she was angry at her boyfriend, soon-to-be ex-boyfriend as well, for shamelessly flirting with other girls. Currently, however, she was still focused on the waitress and the innkeeper. Just because she didn't say anything doesn't mean she's not guilty. It's her fault for flaunting herself in front of all those boys. And you? Do you feel proud, bullying a little girl? Since this is a problem between me and her, you should let us handle it ourselves. If you're shameless enough to interfere in a fight between the younger generation, don't be surprised when the same happens to one of your workers in the future. The principal nearly fainted as he heard the girl screaming, and almost already accepted today as the date for his funeral. Lex, however, turned to look at her, his neutral appearance turning grim, his anger beginning to seethe. Chapter 220. A hero straight out of an anime. Before you do anything, someone sent you a message I think you should listen to. Mary suddenly interrupted Lex's thoughts, before directly playing the message. Considering the current situation, Lex knew Mary would only interrupt him if it was important, and indeed it was. Firstly, her timely interruption woke Lex from his stupor. He realized that he had once again become furious, the same way he had on X-142, though obviously not at the same level. It was strange, Lex never had any anger issues in his life prior to this. But then again, he lived a life where he never really encountered any bullying or blatant antagonization. Fortunately, once he realized that, he quickly calmed down. Secondly, the message provided him with a way to resolve this situation without having to resort to violence. Well, without directly having to resort to violence. Before he said anything, though, he scanned the audacious girl. Name, Heidi. Age 18. Sex, female. Cultivation details, Chi training level 3. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level 1. Remarks, she reeks of a girl with daddy issues. Her boyfriend could either be extremely fortunate, or extremely unfortunate, there is no third option. With nothing special in her status worthy of note, in Lex's mind this matter was no longer worthy of his attention. So far, he had avoided trouble at his end due to the clear intimidating reputation he had established, but there would always be people who were not guided by logic. In fact, there were likely more of those out there than the logical type, it was just that Lex had the good fortune of avoiding most of them so far. Normally, Lex would address others as "dear guest" to make them feel comfortable and respected, but this time, he could not be bothered. Heidi, this is the Midnight Inn. We take pride in our service to any and all guests who honor decorum, but for those who display impropriety, we have no patience. This is not a feud between the younger generation. It is simply you mistreating one of my staff, and me not standing for it. It is already a testament to my good temper that I even bothered to provide an explanation for my decision, let alone the light punishment I declared. The innkeeper's expression was only mildly perturbed, but all who were watching felt the pressure of his words. It was like a suffocating feeling, pressing down on one's chest, keeping them from breathing. For a moment, some were truly afraid of what would happen next, and were ready to escape at a moment's notice. It just so happened that Ragnar, the general in charge of the Jotun forces in the Vegas system, happened to come to the inn just in time to witness these things. He had originally come to the inn because he needed to consult the innkeeper on certain matters, but decided it was best to wait till the situation was resolved. Since you are from an underdeveloped planet, it makes sense that you cannot understand that being served by my employees is a privilege and an honor, but it is not my place to explain these things to you. Originally, since you were sensible enough not to actually try to harm my employee, I was simply going to send you back to your planet and end this farce. Yet it seems your words have struck a nerve with someone, and so, I will indeed let the younger generation handle it. Heidi, who was originally furious, was now flushed with embarrassment and wild jealousy. She accused him of bullying and tried to discredit him in public since she was so used to being around people who cared more for face than anything else, but the glaring indifference in his eyes let her know that if she had not harassed one of his employees, she would never enter his eyes for the rest of his life. His apathy for her was only matched by his concern for his employee. When was the last time someone had cared like that for her? Before she could think much further, however, someone came and stepped in front of her. He was one of the more renowned workers at the inn. Not only did he have a crowd of mothers wanting to spoil him, and the odd girl finding his shyness cute, but he was extremely popular amongst Lex's employees as well. While they all had unique personalities, most of Lex's workers had an air of naivety to them, and it was only with Z's incessant guidance that they took care of themselves somewhat. Of course, he still would not show his concern openly. With everyone's first paycheck of 100 MP, he had them by phones, and he shared all his concerns over a Discord server for the inn employees only. Right now, though, he did not look like a shy geek who spent all his time in front of a screen. Currently, he was looking up at Heidi. He was shorter than her, with his arms folded and a look of disgust on his face. No one could tell at all that he practiced this look in the mirror every time he saw an awesome anime protagonist. For insulting Big Sister Pamela, I could diss you so long and hard, it would put shame to every diss track in history. But I don't have time to waste on the likes of you. I'm right in the middle of watching over Lady, so how about we get right to it? I challenge you to a fight in the arena. If I win, apologize to Sister Pamela. If you win, I'll apologize on Sister's behalf and give you all the MP I have. Internally, snickered. He only had one MP left. Heidi suddenly realized that a massive crowd had gathered, and now they were all watching her. Not only were there numerous guests, slowly more and more of the inn's workers had started to gather. This was the first time any of them faced such a situation, and as a tight-knit community, they were all extremely concerned for Pamela. Even with her inflated ego, anger and embarrassment clouding her mind, she started feeling pressure under the gaze of the enormous crowd, and was thinking of what she could do. But before she could think of anything, Z spoke once again. Of course, since the whole matter started with you guys taking advantage of Sister Pamela, you must join in the challenge as well. He was, of course, looking at Sean and his friends. Naturally, I'll take you all on together. Don't worry, I know this is too unfair a fight for you guys, so I'll only use one hand. As soon as Z said those words, the crowd erupted in murmurs. Lex felt his heart drop, but he did not let it show on his face. He wasn't even sure if this was the same Z who never moved from in front of the TV screen. He had never seen him jog, let alone fight, and now he was handicapping himself. If he failed, Lex wouldn't know where to bury his face from embarrassment. Heidi, on the other hand, suddenly saw hope. Like she knew how to escalate situations, she recognized the current one very well. This kid was trying to show off in front of some girl. She herself had experienced such things 100 times. She had to take advantage of the situation before the kids' heads cooled down. She would vent all her frustrations on him. I've really seen it all, she yelled, making sure all the crowd heard her voice clearly. The innkeeper of the famous Midnight Inn likes to bully little girls, and the rest of you like to force us into fights. I'm not as barbarish as you, but that doesn't mean I'm afraid of you. Come on Sean, let's go. Or is the only thing you can do is ogle at dirty skanks? And you, little kid, don't cry when you lose. I'll have you beg for an apology for every dirty look that ugly wench threw at my boyfriend. By calling out her boyfriend, she put the pressure on him to join her in the fight alongside her. She really needed him and his friends as she herself could not fight at all. They were living in the 21st century, with her prestigious background. When would she ever need to fight? Her cultivation realm was only to prolong her youth and keep up with her siblings. Word of the fight spread across the inn almost immediately, and almost all the guests showed up to the arena to watch the fight. There had been a few matches here regularly since Marlowe and Brandon had their duel, and it had become one of the most popular spots and always hosted a crowd, either supporting a fighter or just enjoying the match. None of that could compare, however, with the massive crowd that was gathering now. Not only because of all the guests, but because after asking special permission, all the workers across the inn came here to show their support for Z. Every one of them seemed to take the feeble-looking kid's win for granted. Only Lex was worried inside, though one would not be able to tell by looking at him.